have dedicated their lives to building a better Nigeria. We are honored to have your presence, your wisdom, and your guidance as we shape the agenda for the new government. Your diverse perspectives, experiences, and insights will illuminate the path ahead, empowering us to make informed decisions and chart a course towards a prosperous Nigeria 2.0. At this critical juncture, let us remember the challenges we face as a nation are not insurmountable. They are opportunities in disguise, opportunities to innovate, collaborate, and build a nation that works for all its citizens. In the words of George Bernard Shaw, those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Today, as we share thoughts, let's challenge ourselves to rethink preconceived notions, to envision a Nigeria that surpasses our wildest dreams. Let us not be bound by the limitations of the past, but rather let us think of a future where every Nigerian thrives, where our economy flourishes, and where our nation stands as a beacon of hope and progress. Becomes synonymous with excellence, innovation, and remarkable success in the global business arena. As the founder and chairman of the Dangote Group, Alhaji Dangote has not only transformed industries, but has also revolutionized the way we perceive entrepreneurship. With his unwavering determination and astute business acumen, he has spearheaded the growth of his conglomerate into a force to be reckoned with all over Africa. Alhaji Dangote is a true champion of economic progress who continues to play a pivotal role in shaping Nigeria's economic landscape. Today, as we gather to discuss the economic future of our great nation, there is no better person to provide valuable insights and perspectives than Alhaji. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Alhaji Aliko Dangote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olaniyan Ajayi, LP, and also Business Day. I want to, thank you for inviting me and, to be a keynote speaker. Unfortunately, I was a bit late, but I'm not late because I can see that there are still more people to come. I wish to thank the organizers of this forum, Olaniyan Ajayi LP and Business Day Media Limited, for inviting me as well as giving me the opportunity to speak at this summit, which is aimed at brainstorming on ways to foster enhanced growth and development of key sectors of the economy. Given the time available, I will restrict myself to a few sectors of the economy, but should not in any way diminish the importance of the sectors that I will leave out. Nigeria has a young, rapidly growing population and is projected to be the third most populous country in the world, behind India and China, by 2050, with an estimated population of a little bit over 400 million people, many of whom will be working age. Nigeria needs broad-based inclusive growth to ensure that its population bulge is converted into an economic asset. Creating jobs to productively engage our teeming youth will ensure that their strengths are harnessed and their ingenuity is rightly deployed. A booming economy will also reduce the alarming level of Japa syndrome as professionals leave the country in search of greener pastures in the developed world. The growth of the real sector will stem unrestrained imports of goods which can be efficiently produced locally, thereby creating jobs and reducing poverty. Because when you keep importing, you are actually importing poverty and exporting jobs out. So I think we need to really be very, very serious with that. To rapidly expand the economy, we need to leverage on strength by focusing on sectors where we have potential to be competitive, given our natural resources, endowments, and large domestic markets. Agriculture is one of such sector. A cursory look at Nigeria's food imports reveals import substitution opportunity of about $6 billion, which can be unlocked from local production of wheat, sugar, dairy products, palm oil, and other food items. We have no business importing these products as they can all be produced domestically or locally. The goal should be to aim for 50% substitutions in the first 4 years of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration. Once this is achieved, we can focus on substituting the balance and thereafter graduate to exports. Achieving a 20% yield improvement in agriculture would increase our GDP by at least 5%. This can be achieved through wider availability and adoption of improved seedlings and improvement in irrigation infrastructure. Fertilizer application needs to increase from the present level of about 20 kg per hectare to at least 50 kg per hectare as per the target in the Abuja Declaration by African Union member states. The target represents an appreciable increase in fertilizer usage, but is still considerably lower than the global average. The global average is about 146 kg per hectare, and I think there are few countries only in Africa that have actually met the 50 kg per hectare. Maybe lack of availability, or maybe pricing, but only 4 countries out of 55 that have actually met the 50 kg. We are at about 20 here in Nigeria. Nigeria is blessed with large tracts of arable land. However, securing access to land for commercial agriculture can be very difficult. I would also urge the state governments to do more in facilitating land acquisition for commercial agriculture. After all, agricultural land has no value if it is not being put to use. And I think it is better we understand that for us to create a lot of jobs, especially that we are targeting 50 million jobs in the next few years, one of the key areas is to focus on agriculture. On our part, abolition all forms of taxes for agricultural production for domestic consumption will further encourage investment and enhance food security. A lot of countries, they give subsidies to agriculture, but I'm not calling for subsidy, but I'm just calling that we should abolish taxes. And aside from the business angle, we must acknowledge that farmers represent a significant voting bloc across the world. Therefore, addressing agricultural productivity and boosting farmer incomes is always a wise move for any politician. India, they actually don't joke with their own, farmers. And that is why really once you are on that seat in India, to remove you is very difficult. So that's why, they have quite a lot of support to their farmers, and I believe we should do the same because we have better arable land than a lot of countries in the world. On our part, the Dangote Group, we are investing in various areas of agriculture. We are executing a massive backward integration program in our sugar. Once our rice mills come online next year, some will come this end of this year, some will come by next year, we'll be in the market for 1 million tons of paddy every year. We will therefore urge the government to support the establishment of large-scale rice plantations across the country to ensure sufficient supply of paddy rice for various rice mills across the country. There are a lot of people that have invested, so I think it's better that we focus and make sure that, Nigeria, at the end of the day, becomes a net exporter of rice, and it's possible. Let me go to solid minerals, which is another area where Nigeria has inherent competitive advantage, given its rich array of mineral resources. These minerals have largely remained untapped. Almost all of them, they remain untapped, and the sector constitutes only 0.2% of our GDP. The potential for growth from this low base is enormous, especially if we invest in processing in processing of the minerals locally, not just to export raw materials. We should concentrate on processing our God-given mineral sources. Limestone, for example, is a low-value raw material. However, we and others have actually invested in transforming this to make cement, thereby saving almost $4 billion, which would have been required to import over 30 million tons of cement being consumed by Nigerians in 2022 alone. Beyond this, we are driving exports to other countries and aim to earn over $400 million annually by 2025. That is our group. We are doing about $11 million monthly now, but I think by the time that we finish some of our plants, we'll be able to export to ourselves to other areas where we don't have limestone. And the target is for us to earn about $400 million annually. These achievements can be replicated in other areas. For instance, $0.9 billion is expended annually in importing steel or steel products. Capturing this opportunity will require government providing all incentives required to develop the entire steel industry value chain. Mining is a highly technical, capital-intensive industry characterized by high-risk exploration outlays, large upfront capital commitments, and long lead times. It is a serious business, and so government needs to withdraw idle licenses for acreages that have actually remained undeveloped for more than 3 years and actively market these licenses to credible local and international mining companies. Why I'm saying this is that a lot of people have actually taken mining for gold, mining for several other things, but what they are doing is that they are only hawking those licenses around. They are not, they are not investing, they are not putting their money on the table. So I think government needs to give, any license that government will give should be maximum of 3 years. If you don't develop it in 3 years, the license should expire automatically so that other people could actually be given the opportunity, to develop. So developing this sector presents a great opportunity to diversify our FX earnings. We should target to increase its to increase its contributions to GDP to at least 2%, and thereby generating over $8 billion of exports. Let's go now to oil and gas. Oil and gas is yet another key sector that can rapidly propel Nigeria's economic growth if harnessed for petrochemicals production, power generation, and other gas-based industries. Nigeria can realistically target 3% share of the global petrochemicals market in line with its 3% share of global gas reserves. These days, what people normally do, they produce more of petrochemicals with the gas rather than doing other things. And that can actually give you much more income than oil itself. This should translate, if we do that, this should translate to $25 billion in foreign exchange earnings by even 2030. You don't need more than 7 years to achieve this, and spawn other local industries. To accomplish this goal, about 20 million tons of production capacity needs to be constructed in various fields of petrochemicals. This is required. This will require huge volume of gas, but the gas requirement will not be as much as what is being supplied to LNG. So you can see the difference. If we now have LNG, I think they consume about 3.5 billion scope. I think with 3 billion scope, we can definitely achieve this. The area that I want to touch on is the 127 kilometer, 48-inch OB3 gas pipeline. This must urgently be completed to unlock additional gas and connect gas sources in the east to demand in other parts of the country. That is via Alps, which is to the west, and then AKK to the north, and then West African gas pipelines. Given government's limited resources, I wish to suggest that financing of gas infrastructure should be prioritized over even rail projects. On a per kilometer basis, gas pipelines are cheaper than rail and will unlock more economic development. And I think we had a conference, this export conference done by Zenith Bank here, and one of the things that I suggested is that why don't we focus on gas-based industries, petrochemicals and coal, because you generate more money. I think the money we generate from oil is not more than 24, 25 billion. We can generate the same thing. So let us take oil to the back seat and make sure that we concentrate on a high-valued items. It's just like us, the most profitable part of our refinery is going to be the polypropylene we are going to produce, which will be cracking and extracting it out of oil. Finally, it goes without saying that the power sector is a key enabler of our economic growth. It has been estimated that provision of sufficient grid electricity could increase GDP growth rate by at least 1 percentage point, if not more. Many ideas have been put forward, but political will is required to drive execution. Any government that succeeds in fixing the power sector will not need to campaign for a second term. These opportunities and many more I have not had time to mention are not new. They have been discussed over the years at different fora, which raises questions as to why the required investments have not materialized. The simple reason is Nigeria and Africa in general is a very difficult place to implement projects. The constraints, hindrances, and obstacles you are confronted with can scare even the most enthusiastic of investors, as attractive as these opportunities may seem. Many investors have been lukewarm. Some are discouraged because of their past experiences, while others are hesitant because of negative perception. But some of us really were very, very stubborn. Despite all that, we continue to make sure that we invest, because if we don't, there is nobody that can make our country great or our continent great but us. So I can certainly relate with their concerns, as I have also had my own fair share of setbacks with some huge commercial consequences. For instance, we initially secured our land at Olokola in Ogun State, which I think, of course, is my props state. To build our Dangote refinery, the petrochemical, the fertilizer, as a complex. But at the end of the day, we had to leave after so much delay, and we were eventually invited by Lagos to come up and build the refinery and the petrochemicals at Igbejuleki. This delay cost us $500 million as we had to draw down and utilize credit lines while waiting for land. You know, without land, you can't even start anything. You need to give the plot plan for them to do soil tests and also design. But this actually, you know, cost us magnificent amount of financial losses because, you know, we just couldn't move. And the bankers have already offloaded and given us cash. And I and Co were counting their gains and we're counting our losses. So, you know, with this magnitude of financial loss, actually could push most companies into insolvency or liquidation. Our two attempts, again, this is another experience, our two attempts to build a new cement plant at Itori in Ogun State were frustrated by the same state government. This cost us over $20 million in sunk project costs because the contractors, you know, had to claim money. And why? Because they started the project and we had to end up stopping the project. More recently, our largest cement plant in Nigeria was forcefully shut down by another state government over their ownership claim. We did not only have to grapple with loss of production arising from the abrupt stoppage, but also suffered injury to staff and damage to property and reputation. It's not only in Nigeria. I'm just giving you some few examples, you know, because what is happening is that people just believe that, no, you know, we always have a very smooth ride, you know. They are always, whatever that they start, nobody will block them. No, we too are having our own share. You know, it's not that we're not having our own share. We're having our own share not only in Nigeria, even outside Nigeria. So let me tell you also, outside Nigeria, after we started, you know, well, after our first call, because we don't have, we generate our power wherever we operate outside Nigeria, only in South Africa and Ethiopia. So this one we now imported coal. We just started offloading the coal to go and start our Senegal plant. And we just received a court order where we were stopped for 16 months. We were actually bogged down with so many lawsuits, and we had to go all the way to Supreme Court over the land of which our plant was built because it was claimed by another party. Although the courts eventually ruled in our favor, the delay, you know, represented a lost opportunity of over $70 million. So once a project is commissioned, operations come with a fresh set of challenges, some of which include inconsistency and sudden changes in government policy. We have had to grapple with multiple policy changes as well as default in meeting obligations contained in our investment agreements. You know, there are other countries who have signed investment agreements, but to respect that agreement, you know, once you have that agreement, it's better you have it to start before there is a change of government. Once there is a change of government, then you are in for a big trouble. And that was really what happened to us in Tanzania. So businesses are also burdened with multiplicity of taxes, charges, and levies. Information from Manufacturers Association of Nigeria reveals that manufacturing sector alone is beset with so many statutory taxes, levies, and charges. We are very proud to be one of the highest taxpayers in Nigeria. We pay tax actually more than any organization in Nigeria, and we are very proud of that. Despite this, we were subjected to numerous tax audits as the focus seems to be on extracting more from compliant companies rather than expanding the tax base. I think the most important is to make sure that everybody pays. You know, not for you now to go and keep hunting the ones that are compliant. So we you know, I mean, we think Nigeria can quickly double or triple their own taxes if the tax base is expanded to make sure that everybody pays, because business is a partnership between the entrepreneur and also the government. Government will give you either incentives or whatever, but their own investment is that incentive that they are giving you. The incentives is not for you to make money, you go and build mansions in Dubai and other areas. No, it's to keep investing in the business so that the business can expand, and they too, their own share will continue to grow bigger and bigger. As you are growing bigger, their own share too should continue. I must commend President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for promptly setting up a committee on tax reforms to address these challenges. Seaports are vital enablers of commerce, and a lot has been achieved recently in the area of port infrastructure. The rehabilitation of the entire Apapa port access and Apapa road network under this presidential order number 7, tax on building infrastructure, and the launch of the electronic call-up system have actually helped alleviate challenges in accessing the ports. The take-up of the Lekki Deep Sea Port, with a capacity to handle up to 6 million containers annually, should help to further decongest the ports. Cumbersome trade processes result in long processing times for exports and clearing times for imports. The government should prioritize implementation of a single window e-customs system and target to achieve 48 hours clearing for containers. Also, the government should target adoption of model law for electronic transferable records within the first term of this administration to facilitate use of electronic documents, for example, electronic bill of lading, so as to streamline foreign trade. Nigeria must address its port challenges. Our port charges are some of the highest in the world and constitute cause of disadvantage for exporters playing in the competitive global markets. Terminal operators need to be closely monitored by regulators, as some of them currently make more money from spurious charges than from their core business. I'm also one of the Lekki terminal operators, but even though we hardly offer services. But these charges are so exorbitant, it is almost impossible for you to be competitive when you export. I mean, for example, if we are exporting our clinker, we built our terminals. Our terminal is highly mechanized, and there is not really much we are getting from MPA. But what we are paying to MPA is equivalent to the freight going to Cameroon. So you can see the disadvantage. And, other countries, they don't actually do that. The charges are very, very low. So federal and state governments must, as a matter of urgency, make the business environment more conducive in order to attract investment into different sectors of the economy. Nigeria's share of net FDI inflows into Africa has actually slumped from a high of 21% in 2011 to less than 5% in 2021 and 2022. Similarly, between 2015 and 2019, Nigeria only attracted 4% of the 70 billion oil and gas investment in the African continent. A conducive business environment must allow for free entry and free exit. In this regard, IOCs that have taken a business decision to exit Nigeria should be promptly allowed to do so, and a new investor with appetite and capacity to invest brought in. What I'm saying here is that IOCs that want to go, they should go as soon as they can, and then let us now go and invite people who have the appetite to invest, or people who really have confidence in our own operations. So that's what I think we need to do to make sure that we don't really grow. Because if you look at it, both Nigeria and United Arab Emirates, they target to get up to 4 million barrels per day in 2022. United Arab Emirates have already reached their 2022. They were on target. we are struggling to even get 1.6, even though we have different issues about oil theft, gas vandalization. I think we need to really sit down as Nigerians to talk to ourselves and see that, look, what can we do to stop all this? Because I've seen really in Iraq, in Libya, where they are at war or whatever, you hardly see people vandalizing or stealing oil. They don't steal oil in Libya. You won't believe that today, 2 of the countries that don't import oil in Africa, there are only 2 of them. Algeria, because they have capacity, and Libya. And Libya, they even export. So, I can't not really understand why is it that we are the ones that are doing this. Even in Algeria, when they had all this, this in about 20 years ago, they had all this, I don't know what, I can't remember their name really. They are not Boko Haram, but I think they are similar of these trouble makers. Algeria's gas infrastructure and oil infrastructure were never ever touched. They are touching other things, but nobody is touching oil. I'm sure even today in Sudan, they are not touching that oil and gold area. They have actually scared those ones, and they are fighting in the cities. So government policies, when made, should be allowed some time to work. And when changes are to be effected, there should be adequate stakeholder consultations to ensure a smooth transition to the new policy regime. Some of these policies should be backed with an enabling legislation to increase investor confidence. While regulatory compliance is necessary, the compliance process should where possible, be streamlined and digitalized. The administrative burden of complying with EFCC reporting requirements, for instance, has weighed down some of the real estate developers and could slow down construction activity, a key provider of job in any economy, where, sometimes people are building housing estate or whatever, they will ask them to, provide the names of the people. They go through a rigorous form of interrogation as to who bought what. And don't think if they are doing that in countries like United Arab Emirates or even in Dubai in particular, they will have this kind of boom they are having. So I think EFCC needs to look at that. In less than 2 decades, Nigeria remarkably moved from being one of the top cement importers in the world to becoming a cement exporter nation with over 60 million tons. This did not happen by accident. The backward integration policy established by President Olusegun Obasanjo helped in attracting new entrants as well as triggering the expansion by incumbents who had for many years not invested in the sector. The beneficial impact of incentives has been witnessed in other sectors and needs to more replicated more broadly. What I'm saying is that government should give incentives for people to come and invest. Once you invest, your government share is for you to create jobs and also pay your taxes. So I think it's a partnership like what I said earlier on. So incentives help reduce the risk inherent in undertaking large capital-intensive projects and so improved project viability. This is especially so in developing countries where incentives help offset some of the disadvantages that investors face, for example, inadequate infrastructure, dearth of long-term funds, high interest rates, etc. In essence, incentives can be viewed as an investment by the government which will be recouped many times over in the future through job creation and taxes. I've said that repeatedly. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we must all join hands to vigorously pursue broad-based growth that will generate economic opportunities for our youth. Government has a huge role to play in creating the macroeconomic and policy environments that will attract private capital. This government has actually shown the political will in taking some tough decisions and this has restored investor confidence. We are confident that many more enabling policies are in the pipeline. We are also confident that these policies will be diligently implemented. Nigeria is one of the best kept secrets, like what I keep saying, in terms of attractive investment returns. The private sector must now do its part by deploying capital to capture the various investment opportunities. I only touched on 3 areas, but there are so many other opportunities. Export diversification to reduce reliance on oil is achievable within the with the right investment environment. With just the opportunity I have highlighted, we can generate sufficient foreign exchange to significantly boost our foreign reserves and thereby strengthen the Naira. Not only strengthen the Naira, with what I have suggested, we can actually have what you call the West African currency, and which Nigeria can use their own foreign reserves to back the establishment of that currency. We just need to work together to make Nigeria great. I wish you a fruitful deliberations, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Our sincere thanks to Alhaji Aliko Dangote, GCON, for the captivating keynote address. Your presence, sir, and your words have been insightful, and your extraordinary depth of knowledge, vision, and passion for Nigeria is inspiring. The emphasis on the development of the agricultural as well as the solid minerals sector, in tandem with the traditional sectors such as oil and gas, is apt, and we hope that this will guide policymakers appropriately. Thank you very much once again, sir.
Thank you, sir. True to our culture of innovation and excellence, at Olaniwa Ajayi, we wrote 2 books. Thank you for clapping. Disruptions and the Law and Competition Law in Nigeria. Fikayo Ogunride will introduce the books as well as the book reviewer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to have everyone here this morning. And I'm actually very proud that our intellectual body of work is coming out to everyone today so that you can take part, in nipping a little bit of the knowledge that we have and also let it sink in and apply it in all areas of the Nigerian economy and in your area of work. I am delighted this morning to introduce to you 2 exceptional intellectual bodies of work birthed by the brilliant minds at Olaniwa Ajayi LP. The first, Disruptions and the Law. Disruption is a word containing 3 syllables, carrying potential for decades of impact. We won't forget easily what COVID has done and what COVID is still doing in very different and diverse sectors of the economy, governance, and security worldwide. One cannot attempt to breeze through a hurdle with the same ease as a 100-meter dash. One, you have a free runner. The other, you have a hurdle race. Obviously, the person who is running free gets to the post faster. But of course, with a little dexterity, the man with the hurdle may keep to time, but then he would have to exert more energy and, in fact, have to conquer all the obstructions in his way. And it is in that sense that this book examines the effects of disruptions in the different sectors of the economy and social structure, and provides a deep dive into the law, the consequences that flows from disruptive events, and provides relevant examples on how we've been able to deal with disruptive events and charting a way forward, for the economy, for the government, for key industry players. This literary body of art is a tool for strategic positioning. It speaks clearly to disruptions and the law and the fluidity of the law to accommodate disruptive events. While still being a cohesive tool for governance, it charts a course for economic security and global cooperation. Our second book, Competition Law in Nigeria, it explores competition law jurisprudence in Nigeria with a comparative analysis of the law in other jurisdictions. It is written as a companion both for practicing lawyers, industry players, and sector drivers as an easy-to-use reference point, and our aim in creating this body of work is to have a helpful compendium with practical examples, illustration of decided cases, and analysis of different aspects of competition law. I must commend my colleagues who have had to burn the midnight candle to create these literary treasures, if I can say so myself, and I do say so. I must also commend the partners at Olaniwa Ajayi LP for providing us with the opportunity to continually engage our intellectual prowess and to have same expressed in writing. This is indeed a proud moment for the firm, and especially the memory of our dearly departed Dr. Khrushchev Ekweme, who was very much involved in the collation and review of the Disruption Law book. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite our very dear Mr. Jim Ovia, CFR, to the podium to do the honors of unveiling these intellectual bodies of work, the Disruption Law, the Disruptions and Law, and Competition Law book for the guests this morning. Thank you very much. You're welcome, sir.
Good morning. Okay. I've been asked to speak about destruction and the law. We have great lawyers there, Olaniwa Ajayi, Ike, and the rest. So I will not speak about the law, but I will speak about business disruption and Nigeria 2.0. Yeah? And fourth industrial revolution. And who is from OP here? Who works for OP? None. Okay. Who works for any fintech company? Let me put it that way. We should have all of them here. Flutterwave? None for Flutterwave. Okay. Okay. Those are the areas I'm going to speak on, because those ones address issues about Nigeria 2.0. I'm sure the organizers of the program, I'm sure that's what they had in mind. But they avoided mentioning about fintech, about fourth industrial revolution, and Aliko talked everything about Nigeria's economy. I thought I should sit down and continue to clap for him. GCUN, Okay, GCON's nickname, Aliko's nickname is GCON. So, the only business enterprise that answers GCON. Shall we put our hands together for Dangote? Yes. So I had called Olaniwa Ajayi that I will be very happy to be here today, but I would just give a simple goodwill message. I will not be analyzing any of his law books at all. Just simple goodwill message. And he said yes, he was perfectly happy with that. So I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, to give a very simple goodwill message. Nigeria 2.0. Services, technology, fourth industrial revolution. Those are the areas that had built America over the past, I would say, 40 years, starting with Apple computers and Microsoft, and more recently, Page, Surgeon, Facebook, Mike Zuckerberg, and so on and so forth. These 3-4 companies I just mentioned combined, they are larger than the economy of the whole of Africa. In fact, one of the companies is larger than the GDP of the whole of Africa, and by which I'm referring to Microsoft, about 2.5 trillion. And also, we have Facebook. Facebook is over 1 trillion. The total shareholders' funds. Then finally, Microsoft. Microsoft is 2.5 trillion. Of course, we all know and realize that Nigeria's GDP is it 4.5 now? Ike, is it 4.5? Okay. 450 billion. Yes. It's still smaller than Facebook. What's the current figure? Okay. It's still smaller than Facebook, still smaller than Microsoft, and still smaller than Apple. And these institutions I'm mentioning, they are not countries. They are companies, not countries. And I was just chatting with asking him, what's the total revenue from oil? I think, Ike, you mentioned 20 billion, about 20 something billion. So the oil we have on our land here, for which we all are very grateful to God, and which we also fight for, is much smaller than the shareholders' funds of some of the technology companies in the US. I think I have the correct figures here. Apple computer that was set up in 1976. By 1976, we had already been sharing our oil well. 3.05 trillion, that's the shareholders' funds. And of course, we all know Apple computer is the maker of your iPhone, is the maker of so many other technology. Then Microsoft, 1975, about the same period of time, by Bill Gates. Bill Gates visited us in Nigeria here a few a few weeks ago. In fact, his friend is sitting there in the front seat. He invited him to come and discuss with us. And he was nice enough to make some quick presentation, and he encouraged Nigerian youths that they should please invest in fintech that will be profitable. I think I watched that. He was very correct, and we have always spoken about this. Anytime I have opportunity to make a few presentations to the youths, I always speak about that. So he was right. We should invest more in fintech, in technology that will be very profitable. That's Microsoft Bill Gates. Of course, his friend Paul Allen had retired for a long time, but enjoying the money he made from Microsoft. Then the next one is Google. Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin actually is an immigrant. He went to U.S., I think just like many Nigerians want to Japan to America also. If they can become like Sergey Brin and come up with something, we'll all be very happy if they do so. Now, Google now named or renamed Alphabet. That's another name of Google. 1.58 trillion in shareholders' funds. And that's an area where many Nigerians, they spend so much time trying to solve the net. If you want to solve the net, you are not talking about solving the net. You say you are going to Google, right? So that's now the name that rules the world in terms of technology. Then we have Meta. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who dropped out from Harvard University after 2-year sophomore. What is the value of the company? About $1 trillion US. And we all know that Mark Zuckerberg is less than 35 years old. He's a young boy. And Ike was already a managing director of a big bank when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook as something that he was playing with. Now, his company is almost $1 trillion in shareholders' funds. You could see all these companies we are mentioning are areas of the economy where I think Nigerian youths will propel Nigeria's growth. Not by building cement factories. Cement factories are very profitable. But Dangote has dominated that already. So leave that for him. And you can now face on other areas of economy. Economy 2.0, that fourth industrial revolution, not in cement. Now, are they doing well in that area? Yes. That was why the first individuals, companies that had tried to mention their name to promote them and introduce them were Opay, Flutterwave, which other fintech companies? Good. Money Point. Yes. Yeah, all of them. They would do very well. And Flutterwave itself, the shareholders' funds is about $3 billion. I think it's about the size of Access Bank. Yes. $3 billion US. So you could really see why we need to encourage such institutions. And when the MD of Flutterwave comes around here, you may not even notice him. But you know that when I comes in, everybody will rise up. So that is 4.0. Yes. Then we have other companies we need to also encourage. InterSwitch is there. CUDA is there. Paystack is there. Paystack was recently bought $200 million US. But that's not the shareholders' funds. That's the amount for which a US company paid for Paystack. They are doing extremely very well. They have not yet launched their company in the US market fully well, but they should do that very soon. When they do so, they may be talking about close to 2, 3, or 4 billion US dollars. Yeah, Money Point is there. That is a team up. They're doing also very well. We want to encourage them further. Those are the areas that Nigerian youth will do extremely very, very well in the area of services. And of course, we know when we're able to launch in 2001, 2001, regarding our mobile technology. But many African countries, unfortunately, they have not been able to deploy their mobile technology the way Nigeria had. East African countries had Kenya, and mostly Kenya, South African countries, South Africa, Kenya, and a few others. Unfortunately, Ethiopia hadn't. We made a business trip to Ethiopia, and we were very surprised that they didn't even have 4.0. They didn't have the 4G, if you will. When we went to Ethiopia, I was terribly very surprised. Whereas in Nigeria, our 4G was already rolling out very tremendously. And now, MTN had deployed 5G, and one other companies had also deployed 5G. That will enable some of these fintech companies to roll out pretty fast and to be able to deploy some of these resources to schools. Without 4.0, 3.0, many schools in Nigeria will not be able to talk about fintech at all, or deploy the technology that Bill Gates was speaking about when he came to Nigeria. So we thank the Nigerian government for being able to deploy the kind of technology that youths need to do very well and prepare very well. So, other than services, technology, what else can you tell the youths? That's the area where the youths will do well. We prepare very well. As far as I'm concerned, that's Nigeria Economy 2.0. At this point, I want to wish you all very well, and thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Many thanks to Mr. Jim Ovia, CFR, for the thoughtful and insightful remarks. We appreciate your time and efforts invested in this summit, sir, and for the welcome thoughts and recommendations that will spur Nigeria 4.0 and perhaps beyond. Thank you once more, sir. Now, it is with great honor and pleasure that we would now like to introduce a distinguished individual who has made significant contributions to the business landscape in Nigeria and beyond. As we all know, Mr. Ige Imokwede is an accomplished professional, visionary leader, and driving force behind many numerous successful ventures. As a passionate advocate for economic development and social impact, we welcome Mr. Ige Imokwede's insight on the discussions that will be had today. Please join us in warmly welcoming Mr. Igboje Ige Imokwede to the stage as he presents an overview of today's panels.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Uncle Jim, you see that nobody stood up. Well, good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me specifically call out the General Overseer of Oladinwo Ajayi, LP, my senior brother, Professor Koyin Ajayi, and of course, Tomini, the managing partner, and my brother, Frank Aigbogun of Business Day. Why? Because not everybody does the needed thing, particularly when you don't have to. And when law firms and business publications go out of their way to convene like this in the manner that you have, as you will see in my address, they must be commended. Our country, our dear country, Nigeria, has great potential. The best way I can describe our potential is that in the 60s, just after independence, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore was convinced that his greatest competition would come out of Africa, so much so that he actually came to visit our country. Why did he do so? He went to, I believe, Cambridge. And whilst he was in school in the UK and interacted with similar students and thinkers like him in the great universities across the United Kingdom, he was convinced that the enterprise and intelligence that was demonstrated by the people he interacted with was so powerful that in his dreams of going back to his country and taking his country from third world to first world, his greatest competition would be Nigeria. And I believe that one day that potential will be fulfilled indeed. But we face a number of structural challenges: inadequate infrastructure, obstacles to investment, lack of confidence in our domestic currency, and of course, we know, because we are highly dependent on this oil issue for our foreign exchange, it has dominated the thinking and actions of economic players. There are others, and we could list them out. Indeed, actually, Alhaji Dangote's economic treatise, which he delivered, covered the entire gamut of the economy. But there are three that we are focused on over the next few hours. I think, as I look at the faces in this room, we must all accept, and we do all accept, that it is in our enlightened self-interest to address the structural challenges that are holding Nigeria back. Whatever it is that motivates you at a business level or at a personal level, the question that we are a major producer of crude oil in the world, and yet we import petrol, we flare billions of scoff of gas annually, yet we endure a perennial energy crisis. We operate Africa's largest economy, yet we face a 2.3 trillion infrastructure deficit. You must ask yourself why. Why? A president once asked me, what are the causes of structural challenges? And I answered him, powers and principalities in high places. And Aliko spoke about those things when he said, look, in the course of my life, I have experienced and endured so much hardship which is unnecessary. I wanted to place Nigeria's single largest investment since independence in a state, and yet I couldn't. So you ask yourself, how can we make it so difficult to progress when it's in our enlightened self-interest to do so? Well, it suggests to me that our elite, and by elite, just look at the person on your left or right, that's elite, okay, are unable to forge a consensus. We are unable to reach an elite bargain to eliminate absurdity from our reality. And without such consensus, until we agree that as Nigerians, we can't have a situation where Aliko wants to cite the biggest investment in Africa in your state, and for 3 years you don't allow him to. I mean, don't just point perhaps at those decision makers. Point at the totality of our political economy that allows that type of thing to happen. So, Olaniwa Ajayi and Business Day have identified 3 aspects of our economy they would like us to focus on: infrastructure, power, and oil and gas. And I'm sure there are some people who are holding themselves and waiting for the time when they will intervene and they will say, why just these 3? Why not agriculture? Why not technology? The impolite response would be, as you stand up to charge and ask why these 3 things are not agriculture and so on, nothing is stopping you from holding your own summit. But the polite answer would be that Olaniwa Ajayi recognized that when you are seeking consensus, you don't try to do so around everything. Pick a few things. I pick my own, you pick your own, and so on. And hopefully, if we are all interested in moving our nation forward, we will touch on all the right things. When Professor Ajayi reached out to me to participate at the summit, the names of those who were meant to speak on the panels, the keynote address by Aliko Dangote, the review by Jim Ovia, and so on, I said to myself, if some, if not all, agree to participate, just some of such highly influential stakeholders to reach a consensus is actually enough. But that you could get Aliko, you could get Jim, you could get literally everybody you told me was going to be here. I mean, you guys deserve a wonderful round of applause. Now, the overarching question that economists have been asking since Adam Smith is simply, why do some countries grow rich? This is the most fundamental, most important economic question. Because it affects destinies, it shapes lives, it causes, there are 9 billion of us in the world today. It causes some of those 9 billion to be in total poverty while some are in nirvana. Why do some countries grow rich and escape poverty and some others don't? It's the fundamental economic question about life. Professor Stefan Durkin, who my foundation brought to Nigeria a few months ago before the elections, and we'll be bringing him in a few weeks, author of the book Gambling on Development, Why Some Countries Win and Others Lose. Go and look at that, read that book. Looks to politics for an answer. And he finds the answer in the concept of elite bargains. He says that countries succeed if the elites agree to a development bargain, actually a deal, okay? And however difficult that deal is to foster, however crude, however unsophisticated, it doesn't really matter. It's just simply that a deal comes together by the elite. Singapore made a deal back then in 1960. Unfortunately, Nigeria has been challenged to make a deal amongst its elites of equal force and sustainability. The World Bank, on the other hand, thinks that some rules-based system is what will solve the problem. But if we think about our own country, which we know very well, and are waiting for that rule system to evolve, I'm not too sure that we will see that potential in a long time. We are people of bargains, people of deals, people of compromise, and deals are not a bad thing in economics. But one way or the other, we need to fashion out a deal, because without it, the next person who wants to cite a great investment, maybe in Edo State where I come from, will suffer only God knows what type of frustration. Those are not jabs at my governor, but I just said it. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with an idea of what elite consensus results in. We have insufficient electricity generation capacity. Its effect on GDP growth, on those youth who will come up with technological innovations that will blow our minds, is apparent and real. At the same time, we flare considerable amounts of associated gas, enough to power Africa at a tariff rate, actually, that probably is more competitive than that which we are talking about today. And we are talking simply about an investment in the region of about $100 billion. Are you saying that with all the schools that these bright minds that are Nigerians have gone to, with all the ingenuity that is ours, with an economy of the size of ours, we can't reach a consensus to do what is necessary to take Nigeria to Nigeria 2.0, 2.3.0, 4.0. That is the reason why we're here today. And so I challenged the panels, I challenged the speakers, not to make it a talking shop, but to make it a transformational shop. Thank you for listening, and congratulations, OALP, and Business Day. God bless.
Foundation on what we should expect during the panel sessions. Your introduction has shown us the immense potential that lies within our great nation and has instilled in us the belief that we have the power to shape the future. I hope it's enough power to tower over the principalities and powers you mentioned earlier.
We would now like to introduce the first panel of the day. The theme for this panel is Unlocking Capital for Nigeria's Infrastructural Development, and will be moderated by Mr. Wale Mieson, the Deputy Managing Partner for Olaniwa Ajayi LP. Please join us in giving Mr. Mieson a warm welcome as he comes up on stage to join us.
So thank you very much, Abi and Sola. And good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for honoring us with your presence. It's greatly appreciated. As already mentioned, the next panel will be looking at how to unlock capital to develop infrastructure in Nigeria. And so without further delay, I would like to invite my esteemed panelists to come to the center stage and take their seats. In no particular order, I would like to start with Alhaji Kabiru Rabiu. Please make welcome. Thank you. I would also like to invite the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Lamido Yuguda. Mr. Kalim Shah, Senior Manager for Nigeria International Finance Corporation. And last but not the least, Kolawole Owoduni, Executive Director, Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. So as we can all see, the panel has been carefully curated so that we can get diverse insights and perspectives from the point of view of the regulator, investor, and also lenders. So let me start with government, Kola. Government at different levels in Nigeria have tried all sorts of mechanisms to attract capital into infrastructure. And one of the interventions that has been done is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the NSI. Now, you have a lot of experience having invested in different projects all across the country. In your experience, what are the key lessons that you've learned in investing in infrastructure projects in Nigeria?
Thank you. The experience has been a very interesting one, definitely. A few lessons to note. Firstly, the J curve is longer than international investors are used to. So the project development phase, the financing phase, the permitting phases, all these things take a lot longer than you would expect internationally. And so you need patient capital, very patient capital, to be able to execute in this market. You also have to chase multiple projects at the same time with the expectation that they will probably take an extra 6 to 12 months to execute and to complete. And so you have to basically have them stacked up in a pipeline. Secondly, the most important thing I think we've learned is currency matching. It's very important to have a blend of currencies for your projects. Also to maximize your USD component versus your Naira component. I think one part of hubris on our side as Nigerians was executing all these projects back in the day in US dollars where they could actually have been Naira financed and would have actually made a lot more sense for the investors in those projects. And so that has been one big lesson for us, which actually led to the creation of infra credit from our side to actually provide that long-term Naira financing capacity in the economy. So those are a few of the points we have learned. The other very important thing is just resilience, because the more you chip away at a particular sector and a particular industry, the better you get at it, and so you can actually have the expertise to execute larger and larger projects within that particular sector. So these are a few of the things we've learned over the past few years.
Okay. Mr. Igudo, Mr. Imokwede just mentioned that the infrastructure deficit is about $2.3 trillion. That money is not going to come from just one source, right? Government revenue dwindling, commercial banks, they have their limitations. Historically, the capital markets have helped the federal government raised about 700 billion in the last 6 years through Sukuk to fund some highway construction. But there are concerns around the depth of the capital market, given the ratio of the capitalization of the capital market to GDP. Do you think that the capital market is deep enough to support significant projects that will assist in reducing the $2.3 trillion referenced by Mr. Imogode?
For that question, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think when you look at the the capital market, especially as an avenue for financing infrastructure, it is not really what you need to look at is what infrastructure are you really trying to finance? How is this infrastructure, how is the framework, packaged? Okay. If you take the example of Nigeria, 20 years ago, we decided we wanted to invest. We wanted to go to, a new telecoms, system, from the all NITEL only, system to a GSM system. This was 2001. And all we needed to do at that time was to really look at what has worked in other places, get an enabling, legislation, an enabling framework, okay, with very clear risk definition for all the operators, with good risk sharing, okay, between the government, and the private, partners. And once we had that, it was not really only the capital in the domestic capital market that then, came to be used, but foreign capital came into the country. So the same thing now. We have a big infrastructure deficit, I agree, but if you have the right framework, you will be able to attract a lot of investment capital that can actually come from outside of the country. And also remember, within the country, you are talking of the capital market capitalization to GDP ratio. It's low. The GDP is the wealth that you already have. The market capitalization is the wealth that is actually invested in the capital market. So what it means is that there is a lot of local capital, local wealth, that is actually in different other pockets, but not playing in the capital market. If you create the right incentive structure, they say that in a typical, PPP, you have three people, okay, three Ps: the public partner, the private partner, and the process. That process, I think, is very important. If you have the right process, for example, we have very poor highway network in Nigeria. And you go to some countries, you have very good highway networks. The difference between our highway networks and the networks in other countries is that our networks actually are free. People don't pay to ride on those networks. In other countries, people pay to ride on those networks. And when there is payment, you will actually be able to attract people who can come and invest, okay, because they have a risk appetite for this kind of investment, or because they've actually invested in other countries in this same sector, and they have actually been able to, amass some skills, okay, and some risk management, capacity to be able to invest. So I think the short answer to your question is that, one, right now there is a pool of money that is not really very, very big, given the massive infrastructure deficit. But if we go, step by step, with creating the right environment and starting with some well thought out projects, you don't have to create the whole thing at once. Okay, start with some right projects. For example, highway. If you just have Lagos, Abuja, Kano, okay, and use it as an example, make it a state-of-the-art highway. you will very soon start seeing other highways actually coming. And you could have even sponsors coming on a, basically, unsolicited basis to tell the government, look, we can build this road, it's very viable, and we know, how, but you have to have the right process and the right, framework. And I think we did it in the telecom sector. We can do it in power. We can do it in road construction, because these things have actually happened in other places. But I think we have to change our mindset completely, about what we want and what we are prepared to sacrifice.
Thank you very much, DG. Alhaji Kabiru, DG said two things. He said we need to have the right framework, and he also used the highway as a reference point. One of the mechanisms that the federal government has put in place to address the deficit in highway infrastructure stock is the RITC, the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme. BUA is one of the greatest beneficiaries of that scheme, with almost $500 billion approval to construct roads. What has been your experience in relation to that particular scheme? Is it working? Should it be tweaked? Should it be expanded? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Walemi. So yes, BUA has signed about 500 billion naira worth of road construction, one in Northwest, traversing Kano, Jigawa, and Katsina State, and one in the north central and southwestern part of Nigeria in Kwara State, for almost 500 kilometers. So totaling about 500 billion naira. So I think what we don't understand really in Nigeria is that our economy is highly dependent on road infrastructure. Over 90% of movement of freight and people are done by road. Our rail system is not really effective in transporting cargoes, as we see in other parts of the world. We know the state of our domestic airlines. So we are highly, highly dependent on road infrastructure, whether it's transporting goods from farms to market or transporting people and their freight and so on. And just to provide some context, we have a huge deficit of this particular infrastructure that is so central, to economic growth and well-being. In Nigeria, we have only 2.1 kilometers for every 1,000 hectares of road, in comparison to 11 kilometers in, similar economies such as Pakistan, Indonesia, and India. And, we have only 16% of our total road network that is paved, compared to 56% in those countries. So you can see that we have a huge deficit of this very critical infrastructure that is needed, for our economic growth. So when we saw this opportunity, we thought this is one of the best schemes, that, was rolled out by the government, in bridging the gap between this deficit and building our road, highways in the country. So we actually jumped on it, and we've signed, and so far it's been going quite well. And the beauty of it is that we know some of the roads that are being developed by the government take maybe 10, so 15 years. I know a particular road that has been going on for about 16 years as we speak. We have given ourselves only 3 years to build this 500 kilometers of roads, totaling almost 500 billion naira. And because the government is not pre-funding this infrastructure, they can now use their time to monitor, the quality, of the roads that are being constructed, as well as ensuring that they are delivered on time. And I think, the scheme could be further expanded, to take care of certain roads that are critical. For example, there's a particular road in the eastern part of Nigeria. I think it's between Enugu and Abia State. It's a few kilometers, but people wait 4 or 5 hours, to travel that distance. So you can imagine the loss of productivity, caused by those, delays and, inefficiencies. It's going on quite well, and I wish, to see this instrument being somewhat like a tradable instrument, so that, it's not limited to only large companies that have huge tax bills, because as it stands today, only big companies like, Boa Intian and the rest, they'll be able to do this because they have, such a tax bill. But if we have an instrument that when you build the road, you could trade it on an exchange, whether on FMDQ or in, NGX, I think it will provide a huge opportunity for us to, use this scheme to build the necessary road that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Alhaji Kabiru. So, Kalim, we are back to the $2.3 trillion question. It's evident that government cannot do it alone. Also evident that we can't get all the $2.3 trillion from the capital markets. The DFIs have been doing a lot. But some say that maybe there is scope for the DFIs to do a bit more. In that context, they say perhaps the reasons why the DFIs are not doing enough is because A, they are more commercial than even the commercial lenders, and B, because maybe they always like gold-plated transactions. Is this a fair assessment of how the DFIs see projects in Nigeria?
A fair assessment, but I think it could be perceived that way. I think the DG mentioned, and my colleague even from NSIA, process is important, right? So what does process mean? Process means that you have, a legal and regulatory framework that is there, that is well known, and quite frankly, that is market standard. So there are already market standards, globally, in a lot of developing markets as well. And if Nigeria follows those market standards, then they'll be able to attract much more capital to fund those deficits. So the question of process is actually very, very important. If you take the time to put together a good process, then you can start replicating that very quickly. So what I see tends to happen is that in Nigeria, we cut short the process. You go out and say you do a concession, right? Let's say for the airports or the roads, right, that we've seen recently. So they go very quickly to market. They don't necessarily get a lot of bids because it's not a well-developed package. And then it goes quiet because when you do have the bidders, then the actual process starts. So then you sole source effectively one person and you negotiate a bespoke agreement effectively for each different type of asset. While what should be done is that you do your process up in the front end, you have your agreements, you have your regulatory framework, and I agree with you very much so you have your buy-in, right? Because you have different levels of stakeholder engagements, from the federal government to the state government, et cetera, because what we are talking about are 15-year investments, right? 15, 20-year investments. We have the ability to provide funding for those tenors, but you need a proper legal and regulatory framework that all the stakeholders have bought into, coming back to your point, and that will last that period of time. Because if you don't have that, there's two things you're going to get. People are going to, you build in that cost in what you're being bid for. So in other words, a bidder will say, okay, if my legal and regulatory framework is not there, A, you're not going to get competition in the bids, and therefore you're not going to get price that will come down. And B, they're going to have a shorter horizon for the return on investment. So again, that gets built into the cost, right? So what I am bidding for to provide a kilowatt of power, for instance, is going to be higher, significantly higher, that we've seen actually in Nigeria compared to other jurisdictions. So I'll give you for instance. For instance, IFC had a program called Scaling Solar, where we went to government and said, hey, if you do these regulatory reforms, and you have these risk mitigations because an allocation of risk. This is a draft concession agreement, and we go and we can then replicate that across various jurisdictions. And we did that very well, very effectively where you were getting people bidding at 3 cents per kilowatt hour, 4 cents per kilowatt hour, right? We couldn't get it done in Nigeria because there wasn't sufficient buy-in on those reforms and that package of, again, market-based structures that everybody is comfortable with in terms of our allocation of risk between what the government will take or the off-taker will take and what the operator will take. And these things aren't rocket science. These are very well-known structures. So yes, if you ask us, about, about how we approach things, it's very much process-oriented because we know it works. We've seen in other jurisdictions that we've worked in Colombia, for instance, where we've done multiple, or even South Africa, where we've done multiple, just very quickly over a short period of time, investments in the power sector. Because there was a process, and there was a clear and transparent legal and regulatory framework that people could bank on, that knows that there has been stakeholder buy-in, that will stay for the period, of the investment.
Thank you very much. Let me take you on this process question. I don't know whether you picked it. It must have been about 6 months to 1 year ago that the former Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, said that China, capital from China is a lot more accessible than capital from the West and DFIs like yourself. Is that also a process question?
Question is, that is a process question, right? But that comes with a cost, right? So yes, you can get to do something with potentially less process. But the question becomes, is it going to be able to do the billions and trillions that you need, right? And I would answer no, because it comes in, now it's slowed down. A lot of that comes in on the basis of government support, so it's actually government debt, so it's actually less pure taking of the project, right? What I'm talking about as IFC, we do it, we take the risk of the project, right? We don't take the federal government risk or the state government risk. There may be counterparty risk that we ask them to mitigate, but we don't take the operational commercial risk of the project, right? And that's how we attract private sector investors. Apart from ourselves, we mobilize other companies and other banks and other DFIs to come in to provide that longer tenor. So yes, it is very much a process question. It's also, they see the similar risks that we would do, right? It's just that they structure it differently. They say, go take a federal government guarantee. So you're not taking that commercial operational risk, quite frankly.
Just one more question, just before I leave you. So I think, at times, it's as if there is a tension between the developmental objectives of countries like Nigeria and funding priorities of DFIs, right? So developing frontier markets, they want to industrialize, they want to grow. DFIs have some other funding priorities. They look at ESG and maybe things that developed frontier markets are not really particular about, because for them it's about achieving industrialization, it's about security, it's about access, right? So there's a sense that some of the projects that frontier markets require to really leapfrog into where they want to be may not meet the funding priorities of the DFIs, right? So previous speakers spoke to the need to use gas to power Nigeria's industrialization. DFIs have a view as to whether gas is clean or gas is not clean, right? So how do we sort of manage that tension between developmental objectives and funding priorities of frontier markets? Put differently, frontier markets, they want to industrialize, but without their hands tied to their back. How can that be achieved?
Okay. So look, I can only speak for IFC tests. I've got the different DFIs work differently and look at things differently, right? So Industrialization for us is key, and we are supportive. The question is how, right? You can industrialize using best-in-class technology, which reduces your operating costs, which helps protect you in the long run in terms of efficiency and energy usage and resource usage and sustainability of your project. Or you can do it not that way, right? You can use an older technology, you can do things in such a way that, quite frankly, may not be sustainable. And to me, that's where the nuance comes in, right? So for instance, I think it's public information now, we've financed $500 million for the expansion of Bua's cement in Sokoto plant, right? That's heavy industrialization, but it's also a very efficient operation, right? They've used best-in-class technology, they're using LNG for their power generation, etc. We're working with them to see how to reduce their energy footprint even more to make it more sustainable, okay? So it's how you do that route, because let us face it, climate change is here. Climate change, unfortunately, impacts developing countries much more than developed countries. I'll give you an example. I heard yesterday one of the state governors had asked the World Bank, the country director, he says, look, there is expecting to be more rains and floods this year. Last year, the farmers lost their crops. This year, they are not planting in the rainy season because they don't want to, whatever capital they have, they don't want to invest it and potentially lose it. So what he was asking the World Bank country directors, can we do a program, can the World Bank do a program to do irrigation? So during the dry season, the farmers can plant, right? And then get water to grow their crops, right? And to me, that's a bit of a sad thing because, you know, now everybody's disrupted. So irrespective of who generates the carbon and the industrialization, everybody is going to be impacted, and it's going to be a heavier impact on developing countries. So it behooves us when we do projects to do so in as a sustainable manner as possible with the lowest footprint while in fact generating the industrialization that countries need to grow. The one other thing I would say is that this is a partnership, right? This is a partnership between the DFIs but also governments. The Nigerian government has an NDCs, which they've declared and said, and then part of that is the Energy Transition Plan, where they want to see how we move from where we are right now in terms of CO2 emissions to basically zero emissions by 2060, right? So that needs to be articulated, and that process needs to be articulated. How does gas-based power fit into that, right? And for us, it does, if it makes sense that you start taking those diesel generators offline, you start taking those gasoline generators offline, and because you get, again, low emissions from a world scale, well, you know, combined cycle, waste heat recovery, et cetera, power investment, than having, you know, the lady who's doing your hair running her gasoline generator, right? So those sorts of things we're happy to sing. So obviously we want to do renewables and stuff, but you need base load, right? Everybody recognizes that. So for us as IFC, yes, we will support that if it makes sense.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kola, you know, some say that capital behaves like sharks, right? Smells blood, it will go after the opportunity. So that then begs the question as to why infrastructure projects in Nigeria have not managed to attract a lot of capital. Is it that the returns are not attractive enough? Or what's the issue? In your experience investing in infrastructure assets, is the juice really worth the squeeze from a returns point of view?
That question. As I said before, the J curve is longer than you would typically expect. The returns are there, definitely in the long run, but the construction period of 3 years rather than 18 months extends the interest cost, it makes that the financial structure you put behind the project needs to cater for those delays that you expect to see, number one. Number two, really speaking, you need a lot more equity than debt in this market. And our investors prefer debt. That is actually one of our biggest problems. Everybody wants to put debt and collateralize it against the house, the car, the whatever assets you have, whereas this needs risky capital to actually allow those projects, blossom. But the infrastructure projects are profitable, especially within some sectors, and they are long-term projects. So really speaking, the best investors for this asset class are PFAs, insurance companies, people that have a very long-term horizon, who have similar currency obligations, and can actually take the project risk for those particular projects. They would actually provide some fantastic returns. We have invested in a few of these over the past few years. And you said capital flood. The issue we also have is there's competition. So you have the DFIs who are looking at a deal in Lagos, but also looking at a deal in Rio de Janeiro. And they are comparing both, right? So you have to make your deal a compelling deal. NSI is different. We actually have a fund focused on Nigerian infrastructure. We invest outside of Nigeria, and we actually invest in other markets as well, which allows us to see, what options, what people, international investors are doing outside of the country, and actually try to
And so, yeah, thank you. What we have seen is the investments internationally have a shorter period and have a quicker exit as well, because there are a lot more institutional buyers to buy off a project once you've actually either finished financial close or you have actually finished construction. And so I think what we need to do in our markets is to deepen the institutional knowledge to actually allow the PFAs, the insurance companies, the large wealth managers to actually invest more in infrastructure. The returns are there. We have seen that.
DG, let me go back to the point you made about frameworks, right? And of course, the important role of the capital market, SEC, cannot be overemphasized. Now, I'm aware that recently the capital market master plan was revised and updated. In the context of the points you made earlier about frameworks, how do you see the capital market master plan assisting and facilitating investing in infrastructure projects in Nigeria?
I think, okay. I think this, what the capital market master plan essentially tries to do is, one, to really align, the structure, of the capital market to the needs, of the Nigerian economy, to mobilize, long-term capital, for financing infrastructure in Nigeria, because we know that this is really a very necessary thing to do. Alhaji Aliko just mentioned the massive demographic, problem that Nigeria has. We, are likely to be the third largest country after only India and China by the year 2050. Already we have the JAPA syndrome, which is a lot of our brilliant young people are leaving the shores of this country to go to other places in search of greener pastures. If you have the right infrastructure in this country, a lot of people that are currently living will actually prefer to have their lives here. Okay, people that are outside will probably prefer to also come back here. There is always a healthy amount of your citizens who should really be seeking greener pastures elsewhere. It's not a bad thing, but the thing is that it should not be a one-way traffic, okay? And only people who are really prepared to go and lead that life, should go. the kind of things we see, across the Mediterranean, these are things that actually should not be accepted, okay? And we can have life here, for our young people. Now, so if you look at this, part of what we try to do is try to attract institutional investors back, into the capital market. So, mention pension funds, insurance companies, people, investors that have a long-time appetite. What do you see now? You see that these investors are actually mostly invested in government securities. So this is your classical crowding out, okay? The government has a big deficit, and because of that, it has a borrowing requirement that is actually large. And because of the risk-free status of government debt, these investors prefer to invest in government debt. But something is happening in this country that is actually going to change that, and going to change that very quickly. Because one, with the recent removal of subsidy on petroleum products, the government's borrowing requirement is likely to come down significantly. So that means there should be less issue of government bonds simply to finance government's recurrent expenditure. Government can still go and issue infrastructure-related bonds, which is good, but just issuing bonds for the sake of financing recurrent expenditure should significantly reduce. If that happens, the capital, and then another thing is the exchange rate realignment and reforms that we have just seen should also make it much easier for foreign capital to come into the Nigerian capital market, because the problem that foreign capital has had over the last few years is you come in at a certain exchange rate, and by the time you are going out, the exchange rate has actually moved significantly. And not only that, the foreign exchange is not even available, okay, to get you repatriate your dividends and your capital. So these things should really make it easier now for foreign capital to come into Nigeria. And then with the reduction in the borrowing requirement, you see that institutional investors will actually prefer to come into the capital market. So that means you are now getting a lot more domestic capital that was not in the capital market coming into play in the capital market. So that means this is available for infrastructure. And I believe infrastructure has a huge future in Nigeria. If you take what Alhaji Kabiru has said, we depend on road infrastructure in this country for our transportation, for transporting goods and people. And road infrastructure is that one thing that actually brings development to the doorstep of all our communities. Okay, if you have oil and gas, it just happens, within certain corridors. But if you have really a good diversified road infrastructure, it reaches every community. And then it opens up the economic potentials of all of those communities. So I think, and then with the large population, you should have a lot of trips relative to other countries that don't have a large population. So the payback period, if you really structure the process right, even the payback period should actually be shorter. Okay, so I think with this, and there is really nothing wrong with people, for example, pensioners, investing their pension contributions in financing infrastructure that will actually raise their own standard of living. Okay, you have good rail, you have good roads, you have good power. Okay, this is really where a lot of pension funds should actually be, invested. Of course, you need to diversify pension fund portfolios, but I think infrastructure has a huge future for Nigeria. And if you look at the GDP rankings, in terms of absolute GDP, Nigeria is probably about number 30, in the world. But in terms of population, we are probably number 5 or number 6. So, there is a huge disconnect between where we should be based on GDP and where we are at the moment. I think if you reduce that infrastructure deficit, Nigeria should start seeing its GDP, absolute GDP, moving up maybe into the 20s, okay? And also with that, we should see increase in per capita GDP. I know what that happens. When that happens, you have disposable income in the hands of people. So you have more domestic consumption, and then you have, so there's this virtuous, cycle, of, development. Yes.
Thank you very much, DG. Alhaji Kabiru, as you mentioned now, or recently, you're already doing a lot in the infrastructure space. Constructing roads of the value in excess of 500 billion naira. From the point of view of a player in this space, I'm sure you want to do more. What are those obstacles that can unlock the opportunity for you to do more? Or for private sector to do more generally?
Thank you. So I think for any, development and investment, there has to be clarity about, input and offtake, and the right framework, as, Khalil mentioned. So for example, if you take, let's say, agriculture, because really in Nigeria, if we look at only 2 areas or 2 sectors, and see how we can prioritize those sectors. So for example, import substitution, and maybe export. Like Aliko mentioned, Nigeria imports some $6 billion worth of food. We import $4 billion worth of textile and garments. So those 2 alone, if you take them, they are $10 billion. And let's see how, we can domesticate the production of those 2, segments or sectors. Now, this is an opportunity for investment, which is largely infrastructure, but it's also an opportunity for economic growth for the country. And I always say, that policy always has 2 sides. So, I like to say it has the soft and the hard. The soft is maybe increasing tariff, banning the importation of certain products. But you also have to do the hard one, which is the infrastructure that is needed to drive the production of whatever it is that you're trying to, restrict from bringing in. So for example, agricultural infrastructure. We have over 35 million hectares of agricultural, arable land, but less than 5% of it is what is irrigated. So you don't have irrigation infrastructure, you don't have flood protection dikes, and this is what Khalil was mentioning earlier, to the extent that the farmers are afraid to go to the farm and grow crops. And when you restrict the importation of food, yet you don't have the enabling infrastructure to grow food, you're simply creating inflation. That is what what you're really doing. So I think we have to have the right framework in a way that provides the opportunity for infrastructure investment and development in areas like agriculture or even transportation and so on and so forth, and mechanization as well, because in Nigeria we have only 0.3 horsepower of agricultural mechanization in comparison to about 1.5 horsepower that's obtained around the world. These are investment opportunities for a lot of businesses, but unless and until they have the right framework, nobody is going to come and put their money where there's no clarity as to how you recoup your investment and make some profit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elijah. I think we are out of time, but maybe just enough time to give each panelist final thoughts. Starting with Kola. Just 30 seconds.
So for us, additions over the past few years to our areas of focus are technology and gas-based industrialization. I think we've talked about both of them today in some depth, but I think those are the areas for significant growth for this economy over the next few years.
Thank you, Kola. DG?
Thank you. I think what I'll just say is, as we look towards, increasing our investment in infrastructure, we should also pay attention to, climate change. Okay, so sustainable financing of infrastructure is very, very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alaji?
So I think we need to prioritize certain areas as a country that we want to develop the infrastructure of. I mean, like Aliko said, you can't do it all. And, they should be focused on import substitution as well as, anything that would enable further export of, whatever produce that we make in the country. Thank you.
Kalim?
Process. Stakeholder engagement and transparency.
Excellent. So I'd like to say a big thank you to our esteemed panelists for their time. Of course, the conversation continues, but thank you very much.
This conversation is that we need to start with the right project and framework, and to put the right process in place. It should not be sidestepped because it makes replicating very easy. And to the next panel, which is energy panel. And this conversation will be centered around the prospects, challenges, and way forward in the era of decentralization and energy transition. To moderate this panel will be a highly respected individual in the power sector, and this is Mrs. Ibi Ogumbi. She is well regarded in this space, and she'll be guiding us through the conversation. Please welcome Ibi Ogumbi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for staying so far at the summit. Without much ado, I'm going to invite the panelists for this panel. I will start with Ms. Oyinyechi Ukegbu. She is the head of the legal business unit at Business Day. Oyinyechi. A pleasure to have you, Onyechi. Please sit down. The next panelist is a little more special than the other panelists to me, because we share two alma maters, the University of Ibadan, the greatest university in Nigeria, and the University of Oxford, the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. I'm calling on Mr. Akinfemiwa. He is the MD and CEO of Geregu Power PLC. Greatest UIs. A pleasure to have you, Mr. Akinfemiwa. Thank you very much. Any which way. Thank you. Next, I will be calling on Mr. Benson Ukewu. He is the CEO of Port Harcourt Disco. Please welcome him. In his full Niger Delta regalia. Thank you. Next, I'll be calling on the financiers. I will call first on, please sit down, thank you, Mr. Fola Fagule, who is a Deputy Director and Head of Financial Advisory Services at the Africa Finance Corporation. Welcome, Fola. Thank you very much. And then I'll be calling on Mr. Surab Srivastava, who is a director at the Chapel Hill Denham Nigerian Infrastructure Debt Fund. Surab, a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much and welcome. And last but not the least, I'll be calling on, I suppose, the guy who holds it all together for us in the power sector, representing the regulator at the federal level, Mr. Dafe Akpeneye. He's a commissioner for legal licensing and compliance at the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Dafe, a pleasure to have you. Dafe is also a learned senior colleague. You know, all lawyers are learned. All the rest of you are just educated. So, thank you very much, and a big welcome to you all. As you know, we are discussing this morning, we're focusing on the power sector, and we're discussing, towards a viable power sector, the prospects, challenges, and the way forward in the era of decentralization and energy transition. Come next month, by August 21st, it will mark 10 years that Nigeria started the journey of privatization in 2013. It's been a decade and it's been a long and arduous journey. And a lot of people on this panel will definitely have different things to say about how far the Nigerian electricity sector has come. More recently, we've had a couple of big developments in the power sector, which we're going to be which will be the focus of our discussions this morning. Last year, in June last year, the federal government released its energy transition plan with, revealing how it intends to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2060. More recently this year, just before the last administration left, the Fifth Amendment to the Nigerian Constitution was passed, which essentially brought into play the decentralization of power regulation in Nigeria, allowing states of the federation to participate in generation, transmission, and distribution, even in areas covered by the national grid. And lastly, we have the passage of the Electricity Act at the beginning of June this year. So on this panel, we're going to be looking at what's the impact of these developments on the power sector. What are the prospects of these developments, and what do these stakeholders see? I'm going to start with my favorite panelist, that's Akin. And Akin, I just want to know, what are your views? You are the MD of one of the successor GENCOs in Nigeria, and you've been operating the company for about 10 years now. And with decentralization imminent, with the states now statutorily empowered, constitutionally empowered and statutorily empowered to undertake the regulation of power distribution, transmission, and generation, what do you see? What do you see as the prospects for your business as a GENCO? What are the challenges?
Thank you very much, Ibi, and good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, once again. A lot of people have spoken this morning about the impact of power on the economy. I look at power, so when I think about power and its effect on the economy, I take one simple statistics from the Journal of Energy Economics. It states that for every 1% improvement in power, there's a 3% increase in economic growth. That is, 1% improvement will give you 3 times in terms of multiples of your GDP. And that makes power central to the functioning of any economy. When we look at the Electricity Act and the power given to states, as an individual, I've always looked at unbundling the power sector as key to achieving all the potentials in that sector. But when we take a close look at it, first things I see is it gives focus for us to put the customer at the core of anything that we're doing. For electricity and the customer, and if we really want to realize the effects on the economy, it's about affordability, reliability, availability, and security. Those things are very central, and I think if we implement this very well, I think it will yield the intended objectives. The second thing I see is a subject of collaboration. Today, we have the NERC, otherwise known as NEC, at the core of the regulatory and legal framework. And I must say that since the inception of the privatization, NEC has done very well in terms of the regulatory and legal framework. As we move to the state electricity markets, it's very key for the states to look at what NEC has done, and rather than reinvent the wheel, I think collaboration with NEC is very key. Where it is not necessary and you do not have the capacity, for example, to set up your state electricity regulatory commission, you should rely on NEC to do that function for you. There are so many things that are being done currently. We have bilateral contracting, which is meant to spur overall efficiency. The Electricity Act is also supposed to spur efficiency. So we should look at the collaboration between the cross-border markets and the would-be state markets. And I also think what is core, or what is central as well for the states, is to look at what benefits the customer ultimately. We are working on a project with Lagos State, and what we've done for the short and medium term is to ensure that we have proposed solutions that will unlock value for the customer at any point in time. It's not just because what happens when you have the regulation, or for states to start producing or providing their electricity, you have people come up with all sorts of solutions. People are going to come, and usually people come with the easiest things that they can do without considering the customer. The states must have the ability to discern the projects that are crucial or that are critical for unlocking the potentials, particularly with unlocking value for the customer. The other thing I see as well is collaboration, particularly between neighboring states. If you do not have that economic, it's not all states that are economically viable, as we know, but if you do not have that full economic viability, try and collaborate with one or two states next to you to share infrastructure, to share services. Lastly, I also see the subject of collaboration with respect to assets. The federal government has distribution and transmission assets all over Nigeria. That collaboration will ensure which assets are critical for the states, and also the regulatory framework that will make investments and private-public partnership central to anything we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akin. And with that, I'll just move to Dr. Benson very quickly. Akin has mentioned the importance of collaboration, being value-driven, and for states to focus on not reinventing the wheel and to try as much as possible to leverage off what has been working at the federal level. Now, coming to you as the MD of a disco, some would say, and it's arguable, that the discos have had the shorter end of the stick in the last decades since privatization. What would you say in terms of what decentralization poses for a disco? For instance, if a state decides to establish a state disco, and this will affect your franchise area and your ability to have customers that are willing to pay for your service. How do you see, decentralization working for you operationally as a disco? What are the challenges or the prospects that you see? Will you fare better with decentralization?
Thank you, Ibi. Let me start by congratulating Olaniwo Ajayi and Business Day on this wonderful summit. I think the conversations we've had here today have been quite engaging. And I'd like to borrow from Ike's contribution when he was on the podium. He talked about the fact that we should be able to cut a good deal for the growth of our nation, a good deal for industrialization, and ultimately for a better life for Nigerians and for companies. It's always important to remember the purpose of power. I always tell my folks that the purpose of power really is for industrialization. When you hear the analysis regarding, the shareholder funds of Facebook, of Microsoft and Apple, and you compare that to what we do as a country in terms of our GDP and all the numbers, it just tells you that we have a unique opportunity to really cut a good deal. And on the back of the Electricity Act, which has just been released, and the decentralization of power, I think it's a welcome development for us, and therefore we need to have a mindset of continuous adaptation to the reality of what a state disco brings to us. In Port Harcourt, for example, we have already started those engagements with the states, having real conversations, because about deals, cutting good deals, sitting with the state governors, and sharing with them the reality of the act and the implications, and of course, finding ways and means to extract value, both for yourself as a disco and also for the state. And let's be very clear, not every state will want to go the route of setting up their own discos. When we are able to improve service delivery, and we are able to manage our infrastructure better, make the necessary investment and attract, the kinds of investors that will come into the network to improve the service, improve reliability and supply. Typically, it's just around states plugging into the whole arrangement and what's in need for them. So it's creating that value, what's in need for the state, and how do we continue to provide the needed improvements in the way we operate. You talked about the 10 years of privatization in the sector, which we have experienced. So states would naturally want to learn from the traditional discourse in terms of what the experience has been and how we can support, whatever agenda they do have. So we have naturally embraced this reality, and therefore what we have decided to do is to begin from the state capitals, what we call a 24/7 power program for the state capitals within the franchise areas. And then of course from that we begin to go into the communities and then see how we can further improve reliability and supply to them. The discos are the connecting point. We are the last mile in the value chain in terms of energy input, and of course the first in terms of cash flow, because the revenues that we generate come from customers that pay. But when you also look at the combination of the customer mix, you also see that there are states that do have more residential customers than industrial customers. And so you're going to have the cross-subsidy challenge in terms of how do you ensure that when you want to implement cost-reflective tariffs, you are able to do that without creating anarchy or crisis within the state's operations. So for us, really, it's really around looking for the opportunities rather than the problems, because we see the upsides, and then, of course, trying to key into the opportunities, but first engaging. My colleague Akin talked about collaboration, which I think is very useful, and that for us is one of the low-hanging fruits from where we can be able to give assurance, reasonable assurance to the state governments regarding how we do operate. For customers, onboarding, for state discos, I think it will be down to the customers to decide how they want to be served. I think for the first time, one thing that the decentralization does is that it brings power closer to the people. So customers do have choices in terms of the alternatives there. And we're happy to first look inwards to see what are the opportunities to improve quality of supply, improve our network, and of course collaborate with the state governments and improve our infrastructure. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Benson. What I hear is that bring that competition on. You're ready for it.
Absolutely.
And that service delivery will be the driver for the day.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, Fola, in a recent article, said that it's not enough that, state governments having the legislative authority to now regulate transmission, generation, and distribution is simply not enough to bring about successful projects. And that, having increasing electricity access, simply isn't going to happen by bestowing that legislative authority. Can you expatiate on that? What do you mean? And what do you see in your position as, sitting as AFC, able to, finance these projects and, have a role in developmental, projects? How do you see decentralization being a key driver for energy, the increase in energy access in Nigeria?
Thanks, Ibi. And again, thank you, Olanu Ajayi and Business Day for having us. The article you referred to was actually jointly written by myself and your partner, Wale Mieso. And in that, we spent some time, it's online, you can find it. We spent some time thinking about the evolution of the industry, the electricity industry in Nigeria to where it is now. It's a useful article. I won't repeat what is in there, but I'll talk about what we are thinking about and how we think about this decentralization issue at AFC now. We think about this from an industry perspective. I mean, it's useful to put some context to where the Nigerian electricity industry is today. It's still a relatively small market. If you think about it as on-grid electricity supply in Nigeria, some of the most recent data out there, it's a less than an 800 billion naira revenue business. The entire Nigeria on-grid electricity supply industry. If you compare that with telecommunications, MTN alone is 2 trillion naira in revenue. The Nigerian telecommunications market is 4.5 trillion naira in annual revenues, whereas Nigerian electricity, as I say, is less than 1 trillion naira in annual revenues on-grid. It's a little over 20,000 gigawatt hours of electricity delivered and billed to customers. It's about 30,000 gigawatt hours of electricity sent out from generation companies. If you compare that with other markets, say South Africa or even elsewhere in West Africa, this is a very small market. And the thing that needs to happen, the key objective of this decentralization has to be, how do we grow this market quite significantly? Because it's a small market and it's insufficient in terms of its ability to fund the electricity that Nigeria requires. So we have a serious energy deficit and we have a very small electricity market. Now, why are we, and why am I in particular excited about decentralization? I think that it does have the seeds in it of creating a much larger electricity market in Nigeria. And how can that happen? That can happen through innovation. I think both Akin and Benson have talked about how this is going to, and these are operators in the market, and you can see that innovation and improved competitiveness is at the core of what they're saying. So you should expect that at the state level, maybe not all of the states, but certainly the more forward-looking states, certainly Lagos State, I expect that you will see a lot of innovation in terms of the kinds of projects that get permitted, in terms of what those projects are trying to achieve across the transmission, distribution, and generation value chain. I think that in River State as well, where Benson is from, what they have with Port Harcourt Electricity Disco there's a history of innovation in self-generation that has been there, and I expect that decentralization will allow even more innovation, because states were innovating even before decentralization was allowed. I mean, AFC as an advisor and a financier, more as an advisor, have been involved with multiple projects at state level. In Delta State, they have a successful project there that we provided advice on. Lagos State has had, mainland power, Alausa power, island power, and others that have been successful. I see in the room developers working on multiple projects, even here in Lagos. So there's been a lot of success historically, but I expect that there will be even more with the decentralized environment. I think the only point I will add to end with is that we need to think not just about growing the size of the electricity market or growing the amount of electricity that we generate, but we also need to think about competitiveness and about the cost of this electricity. I mean, Benson and Akin both talked about putting the customer at the center of affairs. And if you see what's happening right now, we're living an experiment in cost in Nigeria. It's a real-life, ongoing experiment. If you go outside, where fuel prices have, quadrupled, perhaps, and you can see the immediate impact on demand and how demand collapses when prices rise like that. And this is for my friends and colleagues who have always said, cost-reflective tariff is the holy grail. Well, if the tariff is too high, demand will collapse. And if demand collapses, the industry revenues will suffer, and the ability to pay for the product will be hampered. So we need to think carefully about how do we also introduce competitiveness. And this is another reason, as I say, why I'm excited about decentralization, because competitiveness is really what the goal has to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fola. So at the key of it is innovation and competitiveness. So I'm going to turn to Sarab, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Right. Okay. I just want to know your views. When we're thinking about decentralized markets and sort of incentivizing investments into those markets, historically, what has sort of hindered investments in power projects in Nigeria has been, a broad spectrum of issues. But principally being that the view is that these projects are not bankable, and there's been the demand for support from the government, whether at the federal level, most especially, and at state level. Now, with a decentralized energy market, do you think that states are in a financial position to support new power projects, especially given the demand for the credit support being required and being demanded in foreign currency? Someone mentioned on the panel that not all states are economically viable. I mean, that remains debatable. But not all states will definitely have the balance sheet to roll out or support these projects. So even if they do set up, regulatory frameworks, how financially able are they to support the development of these power projects, in your view?
Thank you. So the question of government support for any kind of project infrastructure space is a long subject of history, and it's been debated and debated in many markets. The euphemism is basically you want a guarantee, a sovereign guarantee for your payments, whether it's the state government or federal government. But it's very clear, based on the experience we have had across a number of countries and continents now, that guarantees are not a long-term solution. Your real guarantee is basically a sustainable power which makes sense for all the participants. That is the developer, the user, the lenders, and the government. There is no amount of guarantee. I mean, the fact is the amount of power you require in this country is far more than the government's ability to guarantee payments. There is no question. We have guaranteed one power project at the federal government. Do you think they can do another one? It's really hard. So you have to basically target or structure projects which are sustainable on their own. Banking on a state government guarantee or federal government guarantee is a mindset that has to be done away with in a country like Nigeria. And it's partly on the people like us, the lending community, which has to come out of this mindset. The easy way to finance a project is get a government guarantee and let's go ahead. But the truth is, the guarantees are not viable. When the government finds that it cannot pay, it will find ways out of getting out of that guarantee obligation through hook or crook. And we have seen this in many countries. So let's structure projects at a viable business on its own without looking at any support. Let's stop looking at the governments for supporting financially these projects. Government does need to support in a number of other ways in terms of a standard policy which is not subject to change every time the governments change. Concession being cancelled when a new government comes into power, those kind of things need to be done away with. But the guarantee question, I think we have learned enough that we should not be looking at guarantee as the basis for financing infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Saurabh. And I think that's very welcoming to hear from, you sit on top of a large infrastructure fund, and I think your business model has proved that you can find viable power projects without depending on those sovereign guarantees. Thank you very much. So very quickly, I'll go to Onyinyechi, my learned colleague. And I think people will say, there are people who have the view that, look, this decentralization, no big deal. What's the big deal really? Because states have always had the legislative power to be involved in the regulation of power in areas where the national grid did not cover. So what is new? So how do you see, I mean, if you subscribe to that view, how do you see decentralization playing a big role in increasing energy access? Given that, if states didn't participate before, what's the likelihood that they would participate now in terms of interest or capability? And so how is this decentralization likely to increase energy access in Nigeria?
Thank you, Ibi. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that question. I think that the answer is contained in the question that you asked already in terms of the autonomy that the states had before were in areas that did not have anything to do with the grid that was being regulated by the federal government. But now they have increased autonomy to handle all of that, right? So that gives a bit more confidence in terms of what they are doing. Now, when we talk about decentralization, to answer your question, I do believe that, excuse me, I do believe that decentralization would increase energy access for most of the people in Nigeria, right? And I think that when we look at what that entails, it's basically taking the power of generation, transmission, distribution that was already concentrated in the federal and giving it to the states and individuals and organizations within those states and, around and for residents also to determine what their own source of power would be. So everybody has a sense of, free will, if you would say, to get their own power however they want. Now, what that would literally lead to is a situation that is different from what we have now, which is basically a willing seller, willing buyer market. So say, and we have seen some of those examples already, say an organization walks up to a mini estate in Lekki 1 and says, listen, we'll give you power for X amount of hours, for X amounts at X rate. And the estate agrees and says, we're willing to pay, We want our hours, and they take care of everything. So what that actually does is that the underlying agreement is now contractual in nature, and it's different from what we already had before. And the tariffs are clear. Everybody's complying in one way or the other with the terms of that agreement. And it's easier for people to get what they want from the suppliers of power, and the consumers are more content. However, I believe that decentralization with its many perks has a lot of benefits, but would only work if the regional states and organizations are prepared for it, right? So we know that for the power sector, we require large-scale investment, right? And in many cases, long-term investment for it to work. Now, investors that are coming in with their huge funds are not looking at the power sector exclusively. They have other things within the investment landscape that they are considering. We are looking at our forex, we are looking at our inflation rates, we are looking at all other things that affect investments in Nigeria. And these are things that the states cannot handle alone. So while, generation, distribution, transmission of power has been decentralized to an extent, there are also other factors that would affect its success that need to be handled at the federal level. And so I think it's important, I guess, in terms of the sort of collaboration that my co-panelists mentioned, that is necessary as well to ensure the success that we want to see from deregulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Onyinyechi. And just to wrap up on the decentralization discussion, the last but not the least, I'll be asking the regulator. So decentralization has come, and largely everybody is excited about it. And looking at the Electricity Act, it has tried to delineate the roles of NERC, the erstwhile singular market regulator, and that of the potential state regulators. So I'd like to ask your view. Do you think that the Electricity Act has properly delineated the roles at the federal and state level? Is there market clarity on what NERC role is going to be going forward in the decentralized market vis-a-vis state regulators? And how prepared is NERC for the devolution of its role? Because NERC sat principally over the market, and now that power is going to be devolved to different state authorities. So how prepared is NERC for that? And what steps is NERC taking for its new role in the market?
Wow, that's a lot for one person. Okay, I would like to start by commending the organizers and Olanu Ajayi, what the firm is doing. Only a few years ago, I saw you open the firm in the UK, and only today, as I was reading, I see you have a Hohada practice from Cameroon. I think it's very commendable to see a Nigerian law firm taking our capacity to the world, and well done. I think if I'd known that, I would be ambushed by 2 UI graduates. That's what they do. I went to IFE, so they always try to put us in a corner, but we refuse to be placed in a corner. Coming back, you asked a lot of questions, and I'll try to put them in one. When I resumed in this job in 2017, not having a power background, I had to come up to speed. And in coming up to speed, the Electric Power Sector Act basically became my third child. And I reached the conclusion that it was an excellent piece of legislation at executing a reform, but not good for superintending over an electricity market. And we got to work as a commission, working with the National Assembly and saying, no, we need to have an Electricity Act. And we've worked with 2 sets, and the last set being led by His Excellency Gabriel Suswam, was able to land it. So we have in place what's an Electricity Act now. And if you see other jurisdictions, they've done that. After you've done a reform, you see you have some post-reform issues, and you need to have an enabling law that gives you some kind of certainty. But as Nigerians, we did two things at once. We altered the constitutional framework, which wasn't really, it's always been clear, but we just went back to what we had in 1979, in that the states have always had the opportunity to do grid expansion in areas not covered by the national grid. And we also passed the Electricity Act, which was assented to by Mr. President in quick succession, meaning Nigeria now sits in the same pedestal with jurisdictions like Canada, the US, India, China, Brazil, Australia, whereby you have decentralized electricity markets. Yes, it's when you speak of decentralization from the sake of decentralization, it's good. But when you understand what occurs in the power sector, before I came into this sector, when you would say 1,000 megawatts, I saw 1,000 megawatts as 1,000 megawatts. But when I got in, I realized that every megawatt in that 1,000 is $500 to $1.5 million just for the plant itself. Then you have the other opportunities, right? You're getting the feedstock to that plant, gas or whatever it is. So it's basically heavy industry that is very expensive. And from a capacity standpoint, having a legal training, we believe we are well placed for these jobs. When I got in, I realized it was more of regulatory economics than law, and no university teaches regulatory economics in Nigeria. And this job I'm doing, only 22 Nigerians have done it, of which one has died. So there are only 20 of us left, people who know how to make a determination on such issues. What? Because you're basically dealing with monopolies, and you're determining what the rate of return should be, meaning that you've taken into cognizance that I can't have lines running haphazardly everywhere, and this gentleman needs to make sufficient capital, sufficient return to cover his cost. So that's what we do. And my first training on regulation, the professor said, something I'll never forget, he said, regulation is about disappointing people at a rate which they can endure. And I get back doing the job and I realize you have the Gencos can't stand us. TCN can't stand us. The discos can't stand us. The customers can't stand us because you are apportioning disappointments. Customers want the lowest tariffs, and if customers from my part of the country want no tariffs because we own the gas, so we don't think we should pay for it. The gentleman who's invested all the millions of dollars isn't the Red Cross. And I remember when I was practicing law, one of my partners told me, Daffy, we're not the Red Cross. We are here to get paid. So he's doing it because he expects a return. So you look at the value chain, it's so interconnected. There isn't a slip up. If we're on the grid now, we don't know where the supply is coming from because all the Geregus, egg beans and co, the power is commingled and being dispatched, and they have to get paid for that. That's just a backdrop of the complexity that we face. When you now break down that complexity and you say, we want to take it down to state level, all well and good, because no one has to look to me in December and June and start calling me, Daffy, our tariff is going up, because you would have to phone Lagos, phone Ogun, or phone the other states to make that determination, because that's what it means. If you've taken responsibility for the market, you've taken responsibility for the market. But as a lawyer, once you put a legal instrument out in the process of review, you have interests coming in. And yes, I'm happy that we are not where we used to be, but I believe that there's still a lot of work that can be done, because the Electricity Act hasn't appropriately covered the field. And we've done the reverse, because in constitutional law, it says that when you have the federal and the state, and the federal passes a piece of legislation that covers the field, it binds everybody. We've created a piece of legislation now that says that, oh yes, we have covered the field, but it doesn't preclude what the states can do. So basically we haven't. And this sector requires coordination and precision. And NERC, we've taken it, we know that, we've taken cognizance of the fact that we have to lead this. And we need to have a framework whereby you have the legislation that is clear. You know, people are quick to criticize. And we had a meeting like this last week in Lagos where we said we need to adopt the Indian model. And everyone has been quick to criticize without even asking, what is this Indian model, right? The Indian model basically is, they've always had devolved, but when they were moving to more coordinated tariff regulation, they said, we can't do this haphazardly because of the consequences. So the Indian Electricity Act is binding on all their states. And it determines how they establish their regulatory commissions, and it determines the relationship between federal and federating units, and it determines how you coordinate, so everyone knows their responsibilities in one piece of legislation. When you allow a framework whereby you have the federal relying on the Constitution and the Electricity Act, and you stand the risk of having 38 other electricity laws, because the FCT can go the way of and say, oh, we want to have our own, and you have the FCT, Electricity Regulatory Commission. That's not a problem, but you shouldn't have them operating on different legal frameworks, because that becomes a nightmare. People need to know the basis of our relationships. How do we relate with ourselves? If there's a dispute, the judge shouldn't have to look at start weighing two laws together. So if you have it in one piece of legislation, that, oh, this is what NERC does, this is what the state regulatory commissions do, this is how the state should perform, I think it brings about some greater clarity. And when you look at what the states, the powers you've had and how you've exercised it, right? Because it's expensive, it's not cheap, and it's technical. Even we still have issues that lie within the remit of states that haven't been addressed. Right of way is still a nightmare today. And when you look at the utilization of utility corridors, when I was in law school 20 plus years ago, the Lekki utility corridor for the TCN 330 lines was clearly a utility corridor. Today, it's car park for churches, mechanics, and all sort of, no, it's true, we may snicker about it, but if that line, God forbid, snaps, it will be a major disaster. And that's a responsibility that is clearly within the purview of the states. So if we are going to come together to do this, we all need to accept what the responsibilities are and work together as one team, appreciating the responsibilities and the consequences. And also bearing in mind that, yes, some states may have standalone, maybe in a position to do it on a standalone basis. And really, from what experience has taught me, very few states fall into that, have that capacity. Because similar story I told at the event we had last week. One of the biggest states in the north wanted to do a capacity swap to bring on stream a 500 megawatt plant that couldn't come on stream due to certain constraints. And when we went for the meeting, I told the governor, no problem. Our position is to partner with anybody who wants to bring the lights on. And they sent the Attorney General, Commissioner of Finance, and 2 other commissioners to the meeting in Abuja. And I told them that, look, what you're trying to do, the federal government is contending with in a similar transaction that costs the federal government $40 million a month. And it takes a lot of thinking and flexibility to meet up with our sovereign commitments on that transaction. The Commissioner of Finance says, what did you say, Commissioner? I said $40 million a month. He looks at me. They didn't come back to us. So we have to understand that we are not getting power because someone is being capricious or doesn't like you. We are not getting power because as a nation, we haven't made that investment over time. And we are now at the point whereby we have to make that investment and make it at a time whereby you are going to be the 3rd most populous country in the world, and your demographics are, you have more young people than anyone else. So it calls for a lot of leadership and planning. And so we all need to be coordinated and work together as one team to achieve the objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much. Our time is fast spent, but before I round up, I just wanted to take 2 comments very quickly on energy transition, and I'll just quickly talk to Fola that, you know, the federal government has an energy transition plan in place, and they're expecting, I think, in the first phase, at least $1.3 trillion of investment, looking at the investor deck, you know, to finance, you know, the transition. So I'm just wondering, you know, as AFC, what tools, what resources do you have in place in terms of assisting with implementing the energy transition plan and investing in sustainable projects going forward?
Thank you. So, I mean, for us, AFC, energy transition is at the forefront of our agenda, is at the forefront of our strategy. We are now the largest investor in renewable energy capacity in Africa, or we are a co-investor along with others in the company that has the largest capacity of renewable energy on the continent. We have been at the forefront of trying to assist the government of Nigeria in thinking about energy transition and how best for Nigeria to position itself. We have a white paper on this. Again, I won't go into it in detail. We have a detailed white paper which sets forth our view on energy transition from an African perspective. I think the key thing for us on this energy transition matter has been that, you know, Africa is not a contributor to global warming. This is a very important, you know, Africa is a net positive contributor, if you like, to global warming and to global carbon emissions. And it's very important that transition from an African perspective, certainly from a Nigerian perspective, has to figure out how do we get out of energy poverty. Everything that we've been talking about today has been about the fact that Nigeria is in energy poverty. And so we need to think about climate transition from the point of view of the fact that, you know, we have only, for example, 10 million or 10.3 million grid connected customers in Nigeria today, a population of, you know, 200 million people potentially. I mean, that is, you know, ridiculous. So the number of people that have and the amount of energy that we have access to is insufficient. So a lot of the focus for us is in, yes, renewable energy. Yes, how can we do more wind and solar projects? We've done very few of those in Nigeria. AFC, we've done a lot of this outside of Nigeria, but Nigeria hasn't really taken off as far as renewable energy is concerned. It's about policies that allow solar in particular to really expand at industrial scale, and not just grid solar, but also off-grid solar. Our friends, the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, have done a lot of good work in this area, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. It's also about gas as a transition fuel, and how do we ensure that liquefied natural gas and CNG, really take root in Nigeria. And you're already seeing a lot of transition to CNG as a result of economic factors, right? The fuel price. And we expect that there's going to be even more uptake as far as CNG consumption in Nigeria is concerned, and we're supporting that, that initiative. And then there's other sort of non-energy aspects to it. For example, forest and carbon capture, and how can Nigeria effectively monetize the fact that we have some major carbon sinks that are in our country, that we ought to get credit for, major global carbon sinks that are in Nigeria. So that's how we're thinking about energy transition, and we do think it's a major opportunity for the future for increasing energy access in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for that. And just to wrap up, Aki, I know you have very strong views on this. We were chatting earlier. Just to get your view as a GENCO on how you see the energy transition plan, affecting your operations, and especially given that the new Electricity Act actually has mandatory renewable obligations for GENCOs and DISCOs. So how do you see, because I know that, in your view, it shouldn't really be about transition now, it should be about increasing access. So can you just speak to us more, as your perspective as a GENCO, and how you intend to diversify your energy mix?
Thank you, Ibi, and I think Fola has stressed the careful transition. They need to be very careful about the energy transition, and I hold very strong views with respect to that. Now, there's so much energy poverty in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. And one thing that we need to focus on is energy security and affordability. And we also need to have a quick route to achieve this. When you look at this vis-a-vis the abundance of hydrocarbon resources that we have in Nigeria, we need to be very careful with the West rhetoric on renewables, particularly the adoption of renewables. Why do I say so? Every day we keep flaring billions of cubic feet of gas. Today, the gap between available generation and nameplate capacity, without considering the transmission constraints, is as a result of inadequate gas supplies. Now, what I expect, one of the things that I expect the new act in terms of decentralizing electricity, and I had mentioned it earlier, that we need to focus on the things that are key and that are crucial to achieving this journey within a short space of time. And central to that is our ability to develop the support gas infrastructure for us to be able to develop these vast hydrocarbon resources, as opposed to focusing solely on the ability to bring renewable energy on board. We need to balance it out. Whilst I agree that yes, we should do a gradual introduction of renewable energy, we must maximize and possibly exhaust all the hydrocarbon resources at our disposal first, before we then begin to take all of that. That will give us a quick route to achieving our energy objectives as a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aki. Thank you very much. And most regrettably, we've totally run out of time. I've been getting bombastic side eyes from the compares at the side over there. So we really need to wrap up. I want to thank my panelists. I would have so loved for us to delve into the energy transition issue, but we've totally run out of time. Thank you very much, everyone. I enjoyed your insights, and I'm sure everybody did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the moderator, Ibi Ogunbiyi, and to the entire panel for the fascinating discussions and for your unique perspectives. Ibi, apologies for the side eyes. From the discussions, it is clear that decentralization of the power sector can be a key driver to increasing energy supply, increase innovation, and improve competitiveness, where the right safeguards have been put in place. Before we call the next panel, please note that lunch will be served after the final panel, and we would love to engage with you during lunch. A lunch pass will be provided by the ushers, so please stay behind for the sumptuous lunch. So we would now like to introduce the final panel of the day. The theme for this panel is attracting investment in the Nigerian energy sector, key drivers for investors and strategies to access capital, and will be moderated by Folashade Oluyade, a partner in the energy team at Olaniwa Ajayi LP. Yes, thank you. Please join us in giving Folashade a warm welcome as she comes up on stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to be running quickly into the last panel for the day. As they say, the last has been saved, the best has been saved for the last. So I believe we're going to be having a very interesting ride. I'll just quickly introduce the panelists for this session. I'll be calling first on Mr. Chidi Moma, the General Counsel and Company Secretary of NNPC Limited. Mr. Moma is a seasoned lawyer and with over two decades of experience in the energy sector. Anyway, sir. Anyway, it's fine, sir. You're welcome, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. Second, I'll be calling on Dr. Tosin Itomi. Dr. Tosin Itomi is the head of commercial planning in Sahara Group Limited. He is representing Mr. Tokwe Shonubi, the ED and co-founder of Sahara Group Limited, who is unavoidably absent. And the third panelist I'll be calling up is Mr. Dapo Filani. Mr. Dapo Filani is the CEO of Walter Smith Petroman Limited. He is representing Mr. Abdurazak Issa, who is also unavoidably absent. And the last panelist I'll be calling is Mr. Abel Insa. Mr. Abel Insa is the head of the National Oil and Gas Excellence Center, and he'll be representing Mr. Benga Komolafed, CEO of the NUPRC, who is also unavoidably absent on account of national assignment today. Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome again my distinguished panelists. I feel rather special in the midst of these big men. Okay, so just going quickly into the discussions, and the theme of this panel is actually something that is quite, should I say, critical at this time, attracting investment in the energy sector. A new administration just came on board. Okay, sorry about that. The energy sector remains a critical sector in the Nigerian economy. Today, the export of crude oil still contributes over 80 to 90% of our foreign exchange earnings. I was at an event last week, and one of the speakers said, critically, pointedly, that for us to witness any significant growth or development in Nigeria, the energy sector just has to work. Minus the energy sector, we're literally just playing. So I believe that, one of the catalysts to that growth that we are looking for is investment in the sector. That is what is going to catalyze and, give us, chart us on the right path. So I'll just go quickly to the first question, which is for Mr. Okay, sorry, the first question is for Mr. Abel. No, sorry, Mr. Filani. Mr. Filani, you answered the first question. Sorry about that. Yes, so the first question really has to do with, I think this keeps going on and off, please. Okay. Apologies, I think I keep mixing it up. Yes, thank you. The BAT administration, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, just came on board. And one of the focal points in the agenda is the energy sector, developing the energy sector and all that. But everyone is looking at this administration, everyone is thinking, what are they going to do? Okay, what are they going to do? What's the policy direction, for that sector, given its criticality in to the Nigerian economy? So, very quickly, can you just tell us what you think are the, should I say, low-hanging fruits, and what are the things that the government should be looking at? What should they be addressing to attract the much-needed investment in the sector? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Shadi. This is a topic that's quite close to our hearts. Essentially, is that me or you? So essentially, if you look at the amount of investment that has come on the continent over the past, say, 4 or 5 years, about 70 billion has been spent in the energy space on the continent. And Nigeria only accounts for 3 billion, which is a dismal 4%. And for obvious reasons, right? Over the past couple of years, we hadn't had consistencies in policies, right, of the government, and what we need to be looking at, and what this current government needs to be looking at in the area of policy is ensuring that it gives the market confidence in their policy direction. And one of the starting steps that he's done is to, follow through on the deregulation plan. Essentially, it might hurt us a lot, but overall, in the long term, it will all go well for the sector. Another thing that, we've struggled with in the past, and over the last year or so, things have started to change, is in the area of regulation. With the PIA passed in 2021 and the establishment of the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission and the Mid and Downstream Authority. So it shows and signals to the outside world the seriousness of the country to take, the sector seriously. And your ability to do that would, and what the government needs to do is to sort of shield and protect, our institutions and the regulators from the politics of governance, right? So what that would mean is it would foster, at least signal to the world is change in how things are done. There will be some level of transparency that people will look to see, and efficiencies that have been erstwhile lacking in the past would then begin to naturally take its course. The other thing that I would suggest that this government looks at, and it's very critical, is in the area of security. Now, for various reasons, wealth inequalities, inequality of the distribution of our resources. There have been agitations in the past, right? And this has led to quite an amount of violent crimes. You have to look at people bringing their funds into the country would want to be sure that they're bringing it into an environment that assures of security of life and security of property. I'll give you an instance. In the Nembe Creek terminal, trunk line, I beg your pardon, you have a situation where you pump 100 barrels in, and at the terminal you get 0, because of the constant and consistent infractions prevalent by way of illegal refineries and illegal connections and all of that. So, and you know, as a government, we've sort of paid lip service to the issue, particularly of security and how it affects everybody, even in our personal lives, even beyond, you know, us as an organization. We're looking at, and luckily we have operations in other parts of the world, so it's easier for us to compare, you know, when we compare our operations in Zambia, in Ghana, versus what we're getting here in Nigeria. We tend to spend a lot more in trying to, you know, make our organization work. But at some point, we will need to reconsider whether, you know, the economics make sense. So for me, if there was one key area I would beckon the current administration to focus on and look at, it's particularly in the area of security. Thank you.
That's it. Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. And I think one key point that you mentioned, the issue of security, we're still going to be coming back there very soon. But I think that would just hold that thought. And I think that would just take me straight on to Mr. Insa. Yeah, because, you know, I'm coming from the government. Now we're looking at the regulator, right? And, you know, there are different stakeholders in the sector. The government, obviously, federal government, now the regulators, right? And the question to you is, sir, we've seen with the passage of the PIA, you know, a lot of regulations, you know, being issued by the regulators. We believe that is a step in the right direction, right? And we believe that this is assisting to sort of clarify the regulatory landscape and sort of shape, you know, what the industry should be looking like or would look like, you know, for some months to come. But the question for you, sir, is what do you think, or what are the things that the regulators should be doing, or are doing at the moment to make this sector attractive for these investments that we keep talking about? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's a very good question. And even listening to the last speaker, I spoke about security. But I'll come up to say, in today's world, when you look at the whole global landscape, everybody's talking about energy transition. We spent about 2 decades putting up the PIA in place. Started with the OGIC 1999, 2000, metamorphosed in the PIB and all various series up to the PIA. So everybody expected we're going to come up with this remarkable document that will solve a lot of our problems that was lacking in the Petroleum Act. Now, as we are coming out of that, the whole world tells you that fossil fuels is no longer in vogue. We've heard that all through this morning. So we're fighting 2 transitions, the fossil fuel transition, energy transition, as well as regulatory transition on the Nigerian front. Just as you've said, we've gazetted 8 regulations. I'll start with host community because he talked about security-related issues. Host Community Development Trust. We've also engaged the communities. 2 weeks ago, I think I was somewhere in Uyo as well. So the body language is changing because this is inclusive in nature, and we're talking about shared prosperity here. So it's going to be that difficult. I won't talk to you about some projects we've designed, which communities were taken on board, and you talk through infrastructure, then nothing happened to them as compared to others. So the community is brought on board. Regulations have been put in place. We've gazetted 8 of them. 5 is still with the Ministry of Justice to go through the normal judiciary processes. And so what can we do? That's what we're doing. It's giving direction to the industry. Not just direction, it actually boosts investor confidence. For you to get investments, you need investor confidence. You need to know that, yes, what they're bringing in, they can take out. What they're bringing in, they've got the right things. Conflict resolution issues are things they can resolve easily. Normal governance issues. So you can't talk about today's confidence without the PIA. Section 5 makes provision for us to regulate the technical and the commercial side of the industry. Section 6, I think 6H, empowers us to make those regulations. So in 23 months, we've brought those regulations in place. We've gone on to sensitize the communities. We've go further. We're tweaking the regulatory tools. So entrance, those regulatory bottlenecks are taken out of it. For instance, a field development plan. Shorten approval processes for field development plans for you to commence development of a field, exploration, drilling, and so on. Also, reserve growth. If somebody is coming to you, he needs to know what he's coming for. With about 280 CF of gas, that's big. However, it's got a slight challenge. It's stranded. So it calls for innovation in bringing it to the market, unlike what you're seeing in Mozambique or Southern Africa. That's what's going on right now. So here, and that's what we're doing, streamlining various regulatory tools to get this to the market, as well as processing. The last panel talked about extensively about power, gas to the power sector. So yes, there's depth of infrastructure. So innovative ways are coming in, virtual pipelines for the midstream side of things. So lots are going on because there's competition right now in Africa. If you're looking all around Africa, going around, especially in Southeastern Africa and the rest of them, there's lots, hydrocarbons is being found, as you see. So we're facing not just challenges, but we're navigating those minefields with whatever we have. And I think I'll stop there for now to subsequent ones.
Okay, I think it's on now. Okay, thank you very much for that, Dr. Insa, and sorry, Mr. Insa. And as you rightly said, the last panel spoke, a lot about, the ETP and all those, and we'll still come to that. I think the next question for me will go to Mr. Filani, and we've looked a bit at what the government should be doing. The regulator has spoken. And we believe that the industry players also have a key role to play, right? You can't play in this sector and obviously not want to make yourself attractive, for investment. So the question for you, sir, is, we've again spoken about infrastructure deficit, spoken about a lot of things today that are actually, should I say, top burner issues, and which you as industry players are obviously facing on your day-to-day operations. So the question for you, sir, is what do you think you should be doing as industry players to make yourself attractive, to attract investors, basically, and investment?
Thank you very much. I think in Nigeria today, within the energy space, the indigenous companies contribute significantly to our daily oil and gas production. More than 14% of our oil production today is from the indigenous companies. More than 19% of our gas production comes from indigenous companies. And with the big crude change that is also going on right now, with the divestment and all that, the indigenous companies will play a significant role in meeting the energy sufficiency for Nigeria and potentially sub-Saharan Africa in the near term. We have been told in all the panels earlier that gas will be a very key part of our fuel in terms of energy transition. But the key thing is, let's bring it home. Within the Independent Petroleum Producers Group, which is the umbrella body for the indigenous producers in Nigeria, we've recognized that we have a plethora of things we need to do. One, to get ourselves ready to take over the oil and gas industry in Nigeria and contribute to this. Out of the portfolio of things, I'm only going to mention 3 things. Uppermost for us, in terms of priority number 1, is that we have to ensure transparency, accountability, and integrity. We believe that as a collective and as individual companies, we must demonstrate the highest level of corporate governance and ethical standards. We have to tidy up our shops when it comes to this area. We believe that's the number 1 thing that will make us very attractive to investors on a go-forward basis. Secondly, of course, with corporate governance comes ESG, that the E part of that, we have to take care of how we operate the environment, and the S of that, we also need to take care of. Secondly, we must demonstrate technical and commercial competence. We must demonstrate our ability as a collective and individual companies to operate oil and gas assets in a responsible manner, in such a way that value realization from oil and gas assets are done in the right way, within the right regulatory framework, and ensuring that at least put ourselves in a position where we can attract investments on a long term. Investors will look for places and projects that can stand the test of time. Investors are going to look for projects that are sustainable over time. So third for us, and priority number 3 for us, is human capital development. We believe that for us to build to last, what we're going through now in terms of energy transition into clean energy, we believe that gas will play a key role for that. It's a long-term, gas is a long-term game. And for us, we believe that yes, in as much as we get our corporate governance right, we must demonstrate competence, technical and commercial competence. Over and above that, human capital development for today and for our businesses in the near future must be a priority area, focus area for us. In doing all this, within the limited pool of resources that we have, over and above everything else, we're going to be pursuing synergy. So we're going to look at investment partnerships on a go-forward basis. The days of doing projects standalone is over. So if you're in this business and you want to go standalone, it's over. We believe as IPPG, as indigenous operators, that we now need to pursue synergies by terrain. So if I have a gas project and I have a partner within the same space that's a gas project, can we partner in terms of knowledge? Can we partner in terms of infrastructure for these projects? We see partnerships and collaboration as an area of focus on a go-forward basis for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Filani. And you made very, very, should I say, significant or poignant points, in a very short time. And thank you very much for that. Now, we'll still come back to this issue of energy transition, because that's the last question that I would like, you to share your thoughts on. And I think I'll just quickly go to Mr. Mama. Mr. Mama, anytime I think about NNPC, I look at NNPC as a new bride, right? A new bride, there's so many expectations from family, from friends, from society at large, right? Everybody's just expecting something from this new bride. And so one of the most significant reforms, of the PIA was the birthing of NNPC Limited. Everybody's excited. We are all looking at NNPC. NNPC, there is this dream, or there is this objective of building this company, into a world-class company that will compete with the likes of Petrobras, Saudi Aramco, and all that. So my question for you, sir, is, we are now playing in a new terrain, in a new regulatory landscape, let me put it that way. What is NNPC doing, to position itself to attract investment and giving its critical role in the sector? We are all looking at NNPC. NNPC is like the leader, and we are all coming. So the question is, what are the strategies, being adopted by NNPC in attracting investment, in fulfilling its mandate and its role, in the sector? Thank you, sir.
Let me first start by saying that I'm grateful to be sitting here. And my gratitude is based on the fact that this chair is so much more comfortable than this one down there, which is one of the most uncomfortable chairs I've ever sat on. In fact, I had to pretend to go to the bathroom just to stretch my legs a little bit. But all right. In terms of NNPC Limited, I think investors in the past, under the corporation, NNPC Corporation, often came to do business with us because they felt they had no choice. They didn't always want to, but they needed to. What we're trying to do at NNPC Limited is create an entity that investors want to come and do business with us. And that has entailed a rather ruthless divorce from the corporation. NNPC Limited was incorporated in 2021, and since then a number of steps have been taken by the management led by our GCO, Mr. Kiari, to try and position the company as an astute player, as a company that people want to do business with. So what have we done? We've taken a number of steps that I think it's important to mention. In no particular order, one of the things that we've tried to do is to battle misinformation as to who and what NNPC is and who and what NNPC Limited isn't. Even today, as I sat here, I saw a message that the government has raised prices of petrol because somebody drove into an NNPC station this morning in Abuja and saw that the price had gone to 617. And I've had to make the point on many occasions, NNPC is not a regulator. NNPC does not set prices. NNPC only sets prices for its own stations. And we are in a deregulated economy now, which means that every marketer can set their own prices. And I have no doubt that an astute marketer will see an opportunity that if others are selling at 617, I can sell at 550, I increase my market share. This is the way a market economy works. We are not the regulator. We do not issue oil blocks. We do not endorse licenses. We are your competitor. And that's the first thing that people, and this is what my GCO mentioned at NOG last week. The change from the corporation to limited is not cosmetic at all. First of all, we are now a private company. It is true that we are 100% owned for now by the Federation. And I stress the Federation and not the federal government because the shares are held on behalf of the Federation, which is different from the federal government. And a number of things come with being a private company. Number one, we're no longer subject to Fiscal Responsibility Act, Public Procurement Act, and all the various government hurdles that you need to go through in making a decision. These are all things that make life hard for investors. We are also we no longer have access to government funds, and I think this is a huge thing. In the old days, NNPC never really made a profit, and it didn't matter because we always had access to government money and stuff like that. That has changed. Now, basically, we eat what we kill. So if we don't make a profit, we don't have any money. And I think that will be comforting to an investor because it means that both of us, our focus will be on the bottom line. And so we'll be able to properly focus on what is important to an investor, which is how do we make money. Okay. The organization is leaner. We have done voluntary retirement packages to try and shrink the size of NNPC, but we're also proactively hiring new people. And it may surprise some of you to know that we have expatriates now working for NNPC because we're trying to raise the quality of employers in certain areas. So in trading, in the retail, And even in our E&P company, we have hired a number of expatriates, not a lot now, but the opportunity is there. As long as we find people who we think can add value to our bottom line. What else did I need to say? I think really in terms of preparing NNPC to well, okay, yes, one last point that is also very important for us. We are looking at business opportunities, and that means that somebody mentioned about divestments and so on. Anywhere where we have a right of first refusal, in the past we would have just automatically given our consent to sell to to whoever is interested. Right now, NNPC Limited is examining every single opportunity. Any of our partners who is divesting, we reserve the right to take the acreage at the price that you have agreed with third parties. We will not impose our price, but that's why the right of first refusal means that we have to match what was offered. And we will match it if we think that there's value to be found there. So basically what we're trying to build is an organization that looks like every other type of organization. And well, maybe I should be careful when I say that, because there are many organizations that we don't want to look like. But we do want to look like the top line NOCs. We do want to behave like the top line IOCs. We want to be as nimble as the top line Nigerian independents. And this it's going to take a little while, but we're getting there. And one of the challenges and one of the things that will also work for us is the fact that by law we're mandated to do an IPO. And many of you who have ever been involved in an IPO know exactly what that means in terms of preparing the company to cross that hurdle, in terms of bringing out all the skeletons you've had from your cupboards and disposing of them, in terms of making sure your processes and procedures are in place, in terms of making sure that you are attractive to people who want to buy shares in your company. We think that IPO process is what is really going to help us to get to the level that we want to. So that really is what I think NNPC Limited is doing to get rid of the old NNPC Corporation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mama. And I think that was, very, very, should I say, instructive, really, because NNPC Limited has a significant role to play, in positioning Nigeria, as a world leader today, in the energy sector. And, there's just one last question before, before we round up. And I think being on a panel like this, we won't have a complete discussion if we don't speak to the energy transition plan. And I know a lot today, by the previous panel, the government committing to net zero by 2060. We have our law that's already passed, the carbon, the act. We also have the energy transition plan. And of course, the plan speaks to, the need to deliver the low emissions for certain industries, of which the energy sector is a key sector, So the question really is, sometimes I think about this as like a chicken and egg situation. Nigeria is heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Today, crude oil exports, is still like sort of the mainstay of the economy and delivers more than 90% to say of the foreign exchange earnings. Question, how do we see this energy transition plan, impacting on investment in the sector? Do we see it as a positive or as a negative? I know, I read the plan, and the plan says, there are lots of investment opportunities that this plan is sort of delivering, or is going to deliver in the long term. But now, we are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. That is the reality of Nigeria. So what do we think this, has to do? And I think I'll just give everybody about two minutes to share their thoughts on that question. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me start by saying that the war in Ukraine has exposed the hypocrisy of many European governments in the issue of renewables and long-term climate transition. as soon as gas supply was cut from Russia, what did they do? They went and reopened their coal mines. What can be dirtier or less renewable than coal? I mean, it's just incredible to me that, and I would also point out that I think it was just earlier this month, the chief executive of Shell announced that, one, they're going to cut back on their oil, their fossil fuel. So basically, they had set a limit. They said they were going to cut down on production of oil. He has removed that. He has gotten rid of their head of renewables. And he has said, and I quote, "Cutting oil and gas production would be dangerous and irresponsible. And the world desperately needs oil and gas." This is the head of Shell. So I think we're pretty safe. Renewables are important, let's be clear, but renewables, the time for renewables will come. If you buy an electric car in most jurisdictions, you're going to plug it into electricity that is powered by fossil fuels. So the car is nice, it allows you to say, yippee, see how compliant I am, but at the base of the source of the power is still fossil fuels. I know we have signed up. I know many jurisdictions like ours have signed up for renewable and the climate thing, But again, it's not when the West has finished burning all the coal and using it to industrialize themselves that they will then decide that it's time for all of us, not just them, all of us to move to the next level while we are still struggling. So we will move, but we have to move at our own time. We are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and we will continue to develop it. And I think it is fair to say that the major reason why the IOCs have been divesting from Nigeria is not because of a move to renewable energy. It is tied to what this gentleman said. The fact that you put in 100 barrels of oil from your production facility, and at the terminal you get 3 barrels or 0 barrels. So they are struggling with that. It is the economics and the community relations and the militancy that has caused them. They have not left offshore. They are still very much offshore. The deep offshore, nobody has divested one thing from the deep offshore. All the divestment is onshore and shallow waters, where they've had problems with these areas. So I think it's safe to say that it's not because of the energy transition that they are deprioritizing Nigeria. No, we know what the problems are. Thank you.
So I don't have to, yes, I'm giving up on that one. Thank you very much, sir. And I think, I don't know if I should say that's comforting, but at least I think those points are really, should I say, noted. But I would like other panelists to also share their thoughts, on this question.
Thank you very much. It's interesting, Mr. Momo. Your views are similar to what Mr. Akinfemiwa had mentioned, and to be honest, it's my same view. I call it the paradox of the energy transition. It's interesting how, prior to the Ukraine war, there was all the hue and cry about how we all need to exit fossil fuels. Remembering, or rather conveniently forgetting that we're at different stages of development. I think it is quite, excuse my language, selfish of the West to think that because, they are at a particular stage, they have the luxury to exit or transit, fossil fuels. That's the first part of the paradox. The second part of the paradox is the fact that of all the countries that emit, Africa as a continent contributes only 2% to carbon emissions, just 2%, right? And Africa accounts for over 17% of the world population. I mean, the flip side would be maybe there isn't access to energy, but the point still remains. One of the greenest continent on Earth today is still Africa. And you're, on the one hand, telling us to exit or transit fossil fuels where we know that, you know, our means of livelihood is actually connected to the fossil fuels. Another way to dimension the conversation is, you know, technology and science today is at a stage where, you know, we can't capture carbon effectively, but you never know what science will come up with tomorrow. Who knows? Fossil fuels technology could be invented that would allow us extract the hydrocarbons from the earth in an environmentally responsible manner without damaging the earth or damaging our environment. So I think those are the sort of conversations we need to be having. For me, you know, the whole talk of Africa and the pressure, if you look at even our own energy transition plan, the requirement is about $10 billion annually in investments. It's very easy to say what we need to do, but you know, the focus on how we need to do what we need to do isn't there as yet. So from where we sit, look, the IOCs are exiting and the IOCs are coming. The international oil companies are exiting. The indigenous oil companies are coming to take over that space. And nobody's going to be the architect of your own destiny. We have to take it into our hands and, you know, withstand all sorts of pressure to give justification for why we need to grow at our own pace. You can't have a child that is born today competing with a Usain Bolt in a 100-meter sprint. It just doesn't work. We need to allow, the whole world needs to allow Africa to develop at its own pace with its own resources. You know, that's pretty much where we stand on that. Thank you.
I think as Africa, we have said in all the panels earlier today, there's energy poverty in Africa. We don't have enough. We don't have access. And even the ones that have access, we can't afford. Affordability is a challenge. The statistics is out there. If I bring it back home, it's the same situation. The fact that you use LPG gas in your house, if I tell you that more than 50% of Nigerians don't have access to clean cooking today. In terms of affordability, a significant portion of our population cannot afford tier 2 electricity today. And tier 2 is just having constant electricity for 2 hours in a day. So as Africa, we have recognized that gas will be our own clean fuel for energy sufficiency and energy security and providing the necessary growth that Africa requires on a go-forward basis. So yes, there's energy transition. But for Africa and Nigeria, we must develop our gas quickly to light up Nigeria, to drive economic growth and industries, to make our industries viable enough, whereby we move from just exporter of the product, we start exporting services and products locally. So we surely need to invest in our oil and gas industry and our energy industry in Africa. So for us as Africa, I'll say yes, energy transition is real, but we need an African-focused energy transition agenda. Energy transition on its own will depend on raw materials from Africa, because all the raw materials required to drive the technology for energy transition is resident in the soil in Africa. So one thing which we need to be careful for as Africa is that we don't get into a different set of exploitation and damage to our environment in trying to achieve energy transition. So for us is this, energy transition is real, but our focus as Africa and Nigeria should be meeting our own energy sufficiency for today and in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there's no doubt that energy transition is real. And with Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines out, there was a shift. There was a licensing round in one of the European countries not too long ago. So there's still opening up of fossil fuels capacities. Why? Because Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines were out as a result of the conflict in Eastern Europe. So on our own part, the last panel here spoke extensively about flaring and so on. Yeah, as a regulator, we've stepped up this to go to Nigerian gas flare commercialization program, where we're knocking out the flares, bringing it into production. Just as everyone has said here, yes, we need to utilize ours. So the key word there is energy security. Yeah, we need to get self-sufficient and get on from here. Not that we're not listening to what's going on internationally. We have an energy transition and carbon monetization department right now. So we're even looking at fugitive emissions, and we've brought out guidelines, not just for flaring, but for fugitive emissions. So on that note, yeah, energy transition is real, but there's also energy security, and it should be judiciously deployed and used. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we've run out of time, but just in rounding up, I think what is clear, or what clearly came out of the discussions this afternoon, is that we need to tackle the issue of security. You know, we have to take regulation more seriously. We have to be responsible and accountable. We have to learn to develop human capital, develop our gas quickly, as you said, and of course we should, we should be talking about energy security in Africa, because we're still heavily dependent on these fossil fuels. And I think for me, there are some things that are sort of comforting for me, because given my own area where I where I currently practice, I ask myself, would I still have a job in the next 3 years? But I think from the discussions, I'm still clearly I have a job in the next 3 years. So I want to thank the panelists for taking our time to have this discussion with us this afternoon. I think you actually delivered value for our time this afternoon. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, just in case you missed it, NNPC is not a regulator. NNPC does not set fuel prices, so please be nicer to Mr. Morma during lunch. And to thank our distinguished guests and esteemed participants, I'll call the partner of Olaniwa Ajayi, Mrs. Alabi, to give the vote of thanks.
I think we can all agree we've had an incredibly enriching and stimulating time over the last 4 hours. We have sat here with governments, disruptors, positive disruptors, that is, innovators, and we have all been really enriched today. We say a huge thank you to our keynote speaker, Alhaji Dangote, who has left us now, our book reviewer, Mr. G. Movia, MFR, and also our second keynote speaker, dear Mr. Ike Mokwode, who has also had to, leave us just a few minutes ago. Thank you to all our distinguished panelists. We were greatly stimulated by your discussions. And if I must say, borrowing from Alhaji Dangote's challenge to us, if we all do well, we'll get a second turn, both as governments and also as Olaniwa Ajayi. Please, if we can stay behind for lunch so that it doesn't waste. Lunch is right behind us, and the ushers would let us know how to sit. Thank you very much again for taking out so much time to be with us today, our distinguished guests. You have been we are most grateful as well as appreciative of you giving us all this time. Do take care and have a good rest of the day and week.